Chapter 9:17. Behind these burly men were 300 young men in a square formation. They were practicing the cultivation techniques of the human race, but they were at best beginners. Although their muscles and bones were much stronger than those of ordinary people, they did not have a trace of Panga's sacred energy in their bodies. Many of their faces still looked childish, and they were at most 12 or 13 years old. Some were looking around in confusion as if they were amused by the formation so early in the morning. With such a young age, such cultivation bases, and such temperament, if they were sent to the battlefield, they would not even be qualified to be cannon fodder. Gigu Zi smiled, narrowed his eyes, and nodded. If I go all out, I might be able to put up a fight against these people. Wu Dihao, his face flushed, rode side by side with Wu Tianming's chariot on his green-scaled wildebeest, and walked into the drill ground with his chest puffed out. Wu Qi just sneered. He flew up and hovered over the 100,000 soldiers, looking down at them as he said in a deep voice, "Are you willing to render meritorious service for Great Wu? Are you willing to be conferred the title of Marquis? If you are, just say yes, and I'll have a heaven-defying means to fulfill your wish. If you are unwilling to serve Great Wu, I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to leave." The burly men stood there with a heavy aura of death, saying nothing and staring blankly ahead with dull, lifeless eyes. He gave Wu Dihao a pitiful look and wondered why none of Great Wu's courtiers had said a word to him. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi suddenly realized that perhaps none of the courtiers in Great Wu knew that there was such a thing as killing with a curse across space, or that immortals had a way to behead someone with a flying sword from 10,000 miles away. Well, he could not blame Wu Dihao and those courtiers, but the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League for deliberately creating this situation. They were clearly a group of country bumpkins who had never seen the world. Wu Qi was a little ashamed of plotting against such a group of people. If Wu Dihao had not taken control of Great Wu's military and political power, Great Wu would immediately be in danger of falling apart if anything happened to him. Wu Tianming really wanted to ask Wu Qi to wipe out Wu Dihao's entire clan. With a fake smile on his face, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Wu Dihao, cursing him in his mind for being an idiot. Putting aside the possibility that Wu Qi and his companions might lose this round, even if Wu Qi and his companions lost, Princess Zhang Lu could simply curse Wu Dihao to death. With that, it would be a piece of cake for Wu Qi and his companions to return to Great Wu. Standing in the front of the 300 phalanxes were all big men with numb expressions and missing limbs. There was a stagnant aura of death lingering around their bodies. Clearly, they were fierce soldiers who had been on the battlefield for a long time. To be exact, they were fierce soldiers who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Wu Dihao smiled hypocritically. As if the cough did not exist, he turned to Wu Qi and said, "Senior immortals, the army of 100,000 is here. Don't forget the promise we made in 3 months." Ha 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 ha. After throwing his head back and laughing wildly for a while, Wu Dihao did not even bother to greet Wu Tianming. Instead, he turned and strode away with the company of generals, singing military songs all the way, leaving only a few officers to hand over the roster of soldiers and the account books of all supplies to Wu Qi and his companions. Wu Qi and Wu Dihao had made a bet that the army of 100,000 would allow Great Wu to unify the whole valley within 3 months. Clearly, the 300 men in the small phalanxes were from that army of cultivators, and they were the defeated ones who had been defeated. With a snort, Wu Qi flicked his sleeve, and a gust of wind rolled up from the ground. The thick fog that had enveloped the army of 100,000 was immediately dispersed, revealing a clear plain, and the army of 100,000 soldiers. Wu Tianming jumped up in anger, clenched his fists, and smashed a pillar of the chariot to pieces. Wu Dihao laughed heartily, then waved his fist at Wu Qi and said, "That's great." The chariot came to the gate of the south drill ground, where Wu Dihao was already waiting with a large number of generals. There was a drill ground in the east, west, and south of Great Wu's capital, and the east and west drill grounds were where the imperial guards and capital guards usually performed their drills. The drill ground in the south was where the army took an oath and offered sacrifices to heaven. Of the 3 drill grounds, the one in the south was the largest. Wu Qi smiled, then nodded and said, "Very well. I'll take it that all of you are willing to die for Great Wu. Grinning, Wu Qi turned to look at Gigu Zi and said, Senior brother, I used to think I was despicable enough. The drill ground, which measured 100 miles in both width and length, was crowded with 1,000 small phalanxes led by Chi-Chi. Each phalanx had 10 soldiers, and there were exactly 100,000 soldiers in total. Thick fog shrouded the drill ground, obscuring the faces of these people. From time to time, someone in the square formation coughed a few times. The violent coughing sound was so ear-piercing in the silent drill ground. Glancing coldly at Wu Dihao, Wu Qi said in a flat voice, all the flying swords, magical treasures, and spirit pills they have are yours now, Your Highness. As long as Your Highness is alive, we will never step into Great Wu's territory. Wu Tianming was so angry that his throat was clogged with phlegm. He coughed for a long time but could not speak. Wu Tianming, who used to indulge in beauties, had just ascended the throne, and all kinds of pressures had come at him, making it hard for him to breathe. Now that he had encountered Wu Dihao's shameless means, he couldn't stand it anymore. When he heard what Wu Qi and his companions said, Wu Tianming, whose face was purple with anger, turned to Wu Qi, trembling, and said, Master, this Wu Dihao is outrageous. He ignores the affairs of the dynasty. When he saw Wu Qi and his companions in the chariot with Wu Tianming, Wu Dihao's slightly complacent face suddenly turned gloomy. When the chariot stopped in front of the gate, Wu Dihao crossed his arms and bowed, then said in a cold voice, Your Majesty, senior immortals, an army of 100,000 soldiers is ready. Please go in and receive them. But let me be frank, if you can't let Great Wu occupy the whole valley within 3 months from today, Amidst the purple gold light, the roars of tens of thousands of people rose into the sky. Wu Qi shook his head. The strongest of these men had formed their nascent souls, while the weakest were only in the realm of Jin Dan. As early as yesterday, when his divine sense covered the entire territory of Great Wu, Wu Qi had discovered that Great Wu had 2 armies. One was the main force of about 1 million soldiers who practiced the cultivation technique of the human race. The other was an army of about 300,000 soldiers who practiced the cultivation technique of the Taoist school. Wu Dihao, you scoundrel who has harmed the country. Wu Tianming cursed angrily, not caring how many of his spies were here. The lifespan of the human race was limited. Soldiers who practiced the cultivation technique of the human race could live at most 100 years longer than ordinary people, and after that, they would still grow old and weak. Even though these old men still had Panga's sacred energy in their bodies, and they still had the cultivation base of the 5 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, they could not unleash their full strength. After roughly calculating the combat effectiveness of these 300 phalanxes, Wu Qi shook his head helplessly. A nascent soul cultivator with a full set of flying swords, magical treasures, and enough energy replenishing pills could easily kill these 30,000 men. How strong could these children be compared to ordinary people? They did not have any combat effectiveness at all. Time had consumed their last bit of energy, and it was already not bad for many of them to stand here. It was impossible to expect them to wield their weapons and fight. These burly men were skinny, and most of their limbs were missing. Some had a broken arm, some had a broken leg, and some had both their arms and legs broken. They were like a pile of meat stuck to the ground. Some had lost an eye, some were missing an ear, some had half of their cheekbones cut off, and some were covered with burns from the fire. Apart from the 72 old eunuchs around him, Wu Tianming did not even have a single soldier or horse under his command. Naturally, Wu Dihao was the one who assigned these soldiers to him. Early in the morning, Lu Qingchen, the prime minister in charge of all Great Wu's military affairs, came to the palace and asked for an audience. He informed Wu Qi and the others that the 100,000 soldiers were ready, and that the provisions, pay, and all the materials needed to forge armors and weapons had been prepared for them. MOD, on the other hand, sneered and said, with all the weapons I've crafted for them, why do they need to fight in close quarters? Wu Tianming's face darkened suddenly. Although he did not know much about military affairs, he knew that if they were elite soldiers, how could anyone cough in the line of battle? Who dared to cough in the line of battle, especially when the emperor was personally inspecting the army? Anyone who dared to make a sound at this moment would be punished with beheading, unless they could not control themselves. Amidst the morning mist, a chariot sped out of Great Wu's imperial palace. 300 imperial guards and dozens of old eunuchs in bright clothes were escorting a 9-dragons chariot. Wu Qi, MOD, and Wu Tianming rode in the same chariot, and the procession headed for the drill ground in the south of the city. After laughing for a while, Wu Dihao winked at Wu Qi triumphantly, then narrowed his eyes and said, "In fact, the 3 senior immortals and I have sworn a soul divinity oath yesterday, so it's a proper thing to do. I'm just worried that the 3 senior immortals will forget it because they are too complacent. So, I kindly reminded you." With a strange laugh, Wu Qi produced a handful of spirit pills and crushed them in his hand. Then, he sprinkled the energy they had transformed into a plume of golden-purple aura that enveloped the army of 100,000 soldiers. Wu Qi laughed wildly and said, "You've made a wise choice. Glory, splendor, and wealth are waiting for you." The last 400 phalanxes were not bad. They were all soldiers who had cultivated the cultivation techniques of the human race and had achieved a certain level of cultivation base. Among them, the strongest had the cultivation base of the 5 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, while the weakest had the overall strength of the 1-star realm. It was a remarkable efficiency. For a country like Great Wu, which had a total military force of less than 1 million, it was a massive mobilization of 100,000 soldiers overnight. Clearly, Wu Dihao had put in a lot of effort last night to get everything done in such a short time. When the mist cleared, the 1,000 phalanxes and 100,000 soldiers were all there. But, what kind of soldiers were they? Many of them had a look of fear and despair on their faces. Their bodies were trembling, and it was obvious that they were terrified to the extreme. But, none of them dared to leave the ranks. Intentionally or unintentionally, all of them looked at the few officers standing on the edge of the drill ground, sneering. Chapter 9:18. Enveloped by the golden-purple energy, Wu Qi performed a hand incantation gesture and cried out, "Bind." Countless trees and flowers in the mountains around the valley sprayed out a green mist that was visible to the naked eye, which then turned into a gust of wind that blew toward the south drill ground. The dense green mist converged into a dark green storm vortex over the south drill ground, but at the same time, it sprayed out a large amount of green spirit liquid without making a sound. The strange scene aroused the exclamations of the officials and people in the capital, while the clatter of armors rang out in the distance. It was Wu Dihao, who had just left, running back with a large number of generals, panting. A group of armored generals strode into the south drill ground, then stared at the army of 100,000 soldiers wrapped in golden-purple energy and green spirit liquid as if they had seen a ghost. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the 30,000 crippled cultivators who had lost arms and legs were shivering all over. Their broken limbs were wriggling, and new limbs were growing rapidly. Amidst the cracking sounds of bones growing, their broken limbs were all regenerated in just a dozen breaths, and their muscles were moving flexibly without any hindrance. A huge amount of spiritual energy poured into the bodies of these cultivators, scouring their meridians over and over again. Their meridians felt as if they were being burned by fire, but under the nourishment of the green spirit liquid, their meridians also felt a kind of ice-cold pleasure amidst the burning pain. Their nascent souls and Jin Dan were absorbing the energy from the outside world uncontrollably, and under the control of a terrifying divine sense that could not be resisted, their Jin Dan and nascent souls were undergoing wonderful changes. A golden-purple lotus throne emerged under Wu Qi's feet. Sitting cross-legged on it, he began to narrate the secret of the great Tao he had comprehended that led directly to the secret of the heavenly Tao. Each word opened the sky, split the earth, became sentient, and gave birth to all things. Each word turned into a golden lotus the size of a fist and flew out, then shattered into specks of golden light that fused into the cultivators' bodies. The 30,000 cultivators listened attentively to Wu Qi's explanation of the heavenly Tao. All of a sudden, they felt that the layers of darkness before their eyes were shattered, and a brand new world appeared in front of them. It was as if they had gotten rid of the shackles of their physical bodies. Their bodies were light and weightless. The boundless heavenly Tao transformed into a surging torrent that washed over their souls. They were like fish in the torrent of the heavenly Tao, so refreshed and happy. The wonderful feeling was indescribable. Everyone's cultivation base improved by leaps and bounds. This was because Wu Qi was using his own blood essence to increase their cultivation base and cultivation base. A deafening rumble rang out from beneath Great Wu's capital as more than a dozen giant energy veins were forcibly moved over by Wu Qi's immense divine sense and merged into one under the city. A dragon's roar rang out, and 18 illusory dragons rose from the ground, bringing with them a boundless amount of spiritual qi as they charged into the sky, forming a dense mist in the sky above the capital city. A faint fragrance lingered in the air. All the people in the city, old and young, who smelled it, felt their muscles and bones were strengthened, and all their old injuries and diseases were gone. Suddenly, Wu Qi cried out, "What are you waiting for? Wake up!" The 30,000 cultivators, whose limbs were broken a moment ago, opened their eyes at the same time and roared in unison. A plume of white smoke rose hundreds of feet from the top of their heads, upon which 3 lotus flowers bloomed. All of them had stepped into the realm of heaven immortals at the same time. Although it was only the most basic cultivation base of 36th tier heaven immortals, the incredible scene of 30,000 heaven immortals breaking through at the same time caused countless cries of horror to ring out in the drill ground. Wu Dihao fell to the ground with a thud, while the many generals behind him retreated hastily. From time to time, someone exclaimed, "Humans? Immortals? Gods? Saints? Such a great ability of creation! Heaven!" In the void, 30,000 tribulation clouds the size of hassocks quickly appeared and joined into one, transforming into a huge cloud that emanated a terrible aura of thunder tribulation. When 30,000 heaven immortals broke through at the same time, the thunder tribulation of these 30,000 heaven immortals merged into one, and its power was comparable to that of a high-tier gold immortal. The terrible aura frightened Wu Dihao and the others into fleeing from the drill ground. They instinctively sensed that this thunder tribulation would pose a fatal threat to them. Wu Tianming, who had long seen Wu Qi's means, stood on the chariot and clapped his hands as he cried out, "Master, you're mighty and mighty. You're too amazing for words." Wu Qi chuckled. With a wave of his hand, the tribulation clouds in the sky shattered with a boom, and the tremendous pressure of thunder tribulation vanished without a trace. Then, Wu Qi snapped at the 30,000 freshly minted heaven immortals, "Stand aside and wait for His Majesty's orders." The 30,000 cultivators, who were bewitched by Wu Qi's shocking means, dropped to their knees in an orderly fashion, kowtowed repeatedly, and cried out at the top of their voices, "Greetings, Immortal Master. Please have mercy on us and accept us as your followers, so that we can always listen to your teachings." Wu Qi pondered for a moment and glanced at Wu Tianming. Wu Tianming was so excited that he was shivering all over. He hurriedly nodded at Wu Qi, nodding so hard that his head almost left afterimages behind. A force of 30,000 heaven immortals was comparable to 70% of Great Wu's total military force. With this force, who would Wu Tianming need to obey in Great Wu's imperial court? In any case, he had become Wu Qi's disciple, so what if he had 30,000 more junior brothers and sisters? With a soft cry, Wu Qi pointed at the 30,000 heaven immortals and snapped, "There are not many rules in Lord Daoist's sect. As long as you respect your master and are loyal to the sect will avenge you even if you poke a hole in the sky. Do you understand?" The 30,000 heaven immortals answered in unison. They kowtowed to Wu Qi a dozen times and cried out, "Master," dozens of times. Then, they obediently obeyed Wu Qi's order, rose to their feet, and formed a large phalanx behind Wu Tianming's chariot. At Wu Tianming's command, they released their flying swords at the same time and hovered in midair. Sword lights lit up the whole drill ground like rain, and the bright light pierced the eyes of Wu Dihao and others, who were craning their necks to look over. These cultivators were part of Great Wu's army, but they were forced to retire because of serious injuries. Each of them had a flying sword of low quality, and the sword lights they emitted were only about 10 feet long and did not look very powerful. But, now that their cultivation bases had skyrocketed and their magic power soared, the 30,000 sword lights pierced through the void with a terrifying momentum. After dealing with the 30,000 cultivators, Wu Qi turned to the young men and children in the second phalanx. Shaking his head, Wu Qi sneered and said, you've got it easy. Lord Daoist still has some spirit herbs I concocted in the past, and I'll fulfill your wish today. Then, Wu Qi snapped, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and exercise the cultivation techniques you've learned. These boys had witnessed the miraculous scene just now, and they had long regarded Wu Qi as an immortal who had descended to the mortal realm. Upon hearing Wu Qi's shout, they hurriedly sat cross-legged on the ground and began to exercise the cultivation techniques they had learned. Some of them were practicing the 9 rotations indestructible body, while others were practicing the true body of heaven and earth scripture. At this moment, all 30,000 of them were exercising their cultivation techniques at the same time, and their bodies were surrounded by faint purple mist. Wu Qi took out a small jade bottle and tipped it over. A stream of crimson spirit liquid that came with a strong smell of blood sprayed out, pouring into the bodies of these boys through the top of their heads. The spirit liquid was made by Wu Qi using the blood essence of a group of longbow men in the East Sea, and combined with a large amount of spirit herbs. It had a very strong auxiliary effect on the cultivation of the human race's cultivation techniques, as it could improve the cultivation speed of human warriors by at least 10 times. After sprinkling the spirit liquid, Wu Qi quietly accelerated the time of Dark Ean's celestial tower and applied it on the bodies of these 30,000 boys. With Wu Qi's ability to speed up time by a few times, and with the help of the spirit liquid, it only took a very short period of time for the skeletons of these boys to begin growing. Very soon, they had grown into burly men who looked like wolves and tigers. As soon as he retracted his divine power, these burly men jumped to their feet at the same time, throwing their heads back and roaring as they vented the endless energy and violent power in their bodies. With Wu Qi's deliberate effort, the weakest among them had already reached the cultivation base of 3 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, and the few with the best aptitude were even close to the cultivation base of the second Panga heaven. With a cold snort, Wu Qi stopped the wild shouting of these burly men. Looking down at the excited boys, he said in a gloomy voice, I can make you, but I can also destroy you. Although these boys were not knowledgeable, they were not stupid. As soon as Wu Qi said that, they saw with their own eyes the incredible achievement made by the 30,000 heaven immortals Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi dropped to his knees, kowtowed, and cried out, Greetings, Master. The 30,000 freshly made Chi-Chi kowtowed 9 times, shattering half of the south drill ground with their brute force. With a wave of his hand, Wu Qi ordered the 30,000 disciples to form a phalanx on the left side of Wu Tianming's chariot. Wu Tianming danced with joy and looked proudly at Wu Dihao and the others, whose faces were pale. There were only 40,000 old men left. Wu Qi hovered over their heads like a mighty god as he cried out in a deep voice, Offer me your loyalty, and I'll extend your life by 1,000 years. I can make an exception and take you as my disciples. The 40,000 old soldiers were stunned, and then they looked up at Wu Qi at the same time. An old man, who was so old that he could die at any time, snapped, Is what Senior Immortal said true? A supreme-grade spirit pill is needed to extend one's life by 1,000 years. A supreme-grade spirit pill could only extend one's life by 1,000 years? Inwardly, Wu Qi cursed the old man as an ignorant bumpkin. With a point of his finger, a scarlet pill plunged into the old man's body. The old man's body stiffened, and a tremendous life force suddenly burst out of him. His white hair turned black, and a row of white teeth grew back in his mouth. Suddenly, his withered skin cracked and fell off, and his withered muscles swelled up again. In just a few breaths of time, a burly man, about 12 feet tall and seemingly in his 30s, appeared in front of the crowd. There was a dead silence. After a full 10 minutes, the 40,000 old soldiers dropped to their knees at the same time, kowtowed and said, Please have mercy on us, Senior Immortal. We sincerely submit to you. Wu Qi burst into laughter. With a wave of his hand, he sprinkled the life-prolonging pills he had refined with the sap of the innate divine tree in Yuanling's nether realm. With that, the 40,000 old soldiers quickly regained their youth, and with Wu Qi's intentional help, their overall strength suddenly skyrocketed, with many of them breaking through to the realm of the second Panga heaven. The army of 100,000 had changed in the blink of an eye. Wu Dihao, who witnessed it with his own eyes, swayed and fell to the ground again. In just the blink of an eye, 100,000 old, weak, sick, and disabled soldiers had become a first-class army. The impact was too strong. There was no other sound in the drill ground except for Wu Tianming's complacent laughter. Chapter 9:19. An army of 100,000 soldiers, who had completely transformed themselves, lined up in a phalanx around Wu Tianming's chariot. Their thunderous roars shook the entire capital, causing Wu Dihao and his men to flee the drill ground in panic and exasperation. He and his men had to find a way to deal with this matter, or Wu Dihao's power, status, and wealth would be gone forever, and his henchmen were bound to be purged by Wu Tianming. The few officers who stayed on the drill ground trembled as they looked at Wu Tianming, who was standing in the chariot and receiving the cheers of the army, and their attitude became extremely respectful and submissive. The army of 100,000 soldiers who had been transformed by Wu Qi's amazing divine ability was about twice as strong as the current Great Wu's army. Wu Tianming now had the military force to change the dynasty, and he only needed to gain a certain amount of support from the civil officials to smoothly seize the real imperial power. A few officers bowed their heads and asked Wu Tianming if they could go and check the military supplies Wu Dihao had prepared for the army of 100,000 soldiers. Wu Tianming sat in the chariot with a proud face, while Wu Qi and the other two sat in the same chariot. Escorted by 3,000 warriors with the strongest cultivation base, they headed towards the warehouse on the east side of the drill ground. The rest of the army stood on the drill ground like Chi-Chi, working hard to exercise their cultivation techniques. The medicinal strength of the spirit pills Wu Qi had just crushed had not completely dissipated, and purple gold energy was still swirling in the air. If they could absorb a little more energy, their overall strength would improve a lot. This was an extremely rare opportunity, so they naturally had to seize it. On the east side of the drill ground was a large area of brick and stone bungalows that were tens of feet tall. They were usually idle, and only when the army went out to battle would military supplies be transferred here from the armory for storage. At this time, dozens of soldiers were stationed outside the warehouse. When they saw Wu Tianming's chariot approaching, they all knelt down with great respect and even a little fear. This was a treatment that Wu Tianming had never enjoyed before. In the days since he took over the throne, even the most ordinary soldier in the imperial army would not kneel to him. Wu Tianming's face was flushed with excitement as he received the salutations of these soldiers. His dignity as an emperor was slowly accumulating through these small things. Like an unpolished jade that had its outer layer cut open, he was transforming into a true emperor. The heavy metal door of the warehouse slowly opened, revealing the mountain of supplies inside. However, Wu Qi, Gue Guzi, and Mod rolled their eyes at the same time when they saw the equipment. It was just as they had expected. Wu Tianming, on the other hand, was so angry that his face turned red. He clenched his fist and waved it towards the sky, shouting, "Old thief, I will kill his entire family." There were more than 100,000 sets of armor and weapons in the warehouse, as well as a large number of crossbows and arrows. However, those armors could only be described as tattered by bugs and rats. Some of the armors were full of fist-sized holes. The edges of the swords, spears, swords, and halberds were rusted, and some of the handles had fallen off, making them unusable in battle. The crossbows and arrows were mostly intact, but the bowstrings were all loose and broken, so there were not many crossbows that could be used normally. As for the arrows, it was obvious that they were junk recycled from the battlefield. Not only were the arrowheads worn flat, but the feathers were also peeled off. Even if they were used to shoot rabbits, they would not be able to hit the target. There were also a large number of reserve supplies in several other warehouses. Wu Dihao was very considerate, fearing that the army would consume a lot of supplies, so he had prepared enough for the 100,000 soldiers, enough iron ore to make a full set of equipment for 300,000 soldiers. Yes, they were iron ore. If these iron ore could be refined into fine iron and forged into ordnance, it would be enough to arm 300,000 soldiers. But now, they were still stored in the warehouse in the form of iron ore, and the grayish-brown stones that were piled up like a mountain gave them a sense of existence. There were also other messy things, such as soldiers' battle clothes and boots. No matter how you looked at it, they looked like they came from the dead. There were also some commoners' clothes mixed in with them. There were even a few flowery pink long skirts placed in a very conspicuous place. It would be a good thing if they were not ridiculed to death by the enemy when they wore these things to the battlefield, not to mention fighting a battle. Most importantly, they had stocked up quite a lot of rations, all of which were cornbread. It was clear that the cornbread had just been steamed. They filled up 7 to 8 storehouses, and it looked like it was enough to feed 100,000 soldiers for 3 months. When the doors of these warehouses were opened, the fragrance of cooked corn wafted into their nostrils and whetted their appetite. It was just that he didn't know which great chef had instructed him to steam the cornbread. Inside the cornbread of different sizes, he could clearly see a large number of intact corn kernels. They weren't fresh corn, but old corn that had been dried in the sun. Wu Qi suspected that if someone with a weak stomach ate a few of these cornbread, the old corn kernels would come out intact, and it would be impossible to digest them. Wu Tianming's eyes turned green in anger. He threw another punch and shattered another pillar of the chariot. Clang! The roof of the chariot fell down and was sent flying away by Wu Tianming's punch. Wu Tianming snapped, "Wu Di Hao. You. Good. Very good." Wu Qi shook his head disapprovingly and said indifferently, "There's no need to be angry, Your Majesty. Combat suits, boots, and rations are all easy to buy. As long as Your Majesty spends some money, you can buy these things anywhere. Give Your Majesty a month, and you'll be able to get the clothes and rations for the 100,000 soldiers." Mod nodded and said, "As for the ordnance and weapons, with so many iron ores here, I'm sure they'll be ready in half a month." Wu Tianming's eyes lit up. He looked at Wu Qi and asked, "Master, it'll take a month?" "It doesn't matter, Your Majesty," Gigu Zi said lightly, "you just need to get the clothes and rations for the soldiers. Why would it take 3 months to sweep this valley? A few days is enough. In this month, I'll train these 100,000 soldiers and make them practice the 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation. When they are proficient in it, this valley will be Great Wu's territory." Wu Tianming believed Wu Qi and his companions unconditionally. He immediately rose to his feet and took his leave. Escorted by 72 old eunuchs and 3,000 guards, he returned to the imperial palace and began to prepare the clothes and rations for the soldiers. Although the military and political power were in Wu Dihao's hands, and the affairs of the imperial harem were under the control of the Empress Dowager, Wu Tianming still had some private money when he was a king. Now, for the sake of the duel, he took out his private money and went around to buy the clothes and rations for the soldiers. Some courtiers had heard about what had happened in the drill ground through various channels, and in just a few days, dozens of officials had secretly submitted to Wu Tianming. With the help of these officials, the preparation of the clothes and rations for the soldiers went very smoothly. Half a month later, some important courtiers even secretly swore allegiance to Wu Tianming. Unknowingly, the number of civil officials under Wu Tianming's control in the court had exceeded 50%. It was just that the military officers were dead set on following Wu Dihao, and he did not gain much from the army. But with 72 old eunuchs and 100,000 soldiers following him, Wu Tianming did not attach much importance to these military officers. He had even made the decision to clean up the system of military officers after the duel. In the drill ground, a bronze cauldron was wrapped in a crimson flame. Countless iron ores were constantly flowing into it, and before long, iron ingots shining with various colors flew out of it. The cauldron was crafted by Wu Qi with the heaven refining cauldron. Its quality was close to that of a primordial artifact, and it was a waste to use it to purify iron. While the iron ores were being purified, Wu Qi had also added some materials such as the energy essence of the 5 elements into them. So, the seemingly ordinary iron ingots were actually treasures of heaven and earth, and were even qualified to be used to forge gold immortal artifacts. Just as he did that day in the Great Hall, Mod shot a jet of flame from his palm and threw one iron ingot after another into his palm. Weapons and sets of armors flew out from the other side of the flame. All the weapons and armors looked ordinary and inconspicuous, but their quality was absolutely amazing. The 70,000 soldiers who practiced the cultivation technique of the human race were all clad in heavy armors and double-handed sabers, each equipped with a longbow and 30 arrows. They were very lethal in both long-range and close-range combat. With the quality of the armaments of the other kingdoms in the valley, their weapons would not be able to break the armors of these 70,000 soldiers, and their armors would not be able to block the sabers in the hands of these 70,000 soldiers. Facing these 70,000 soldiers of the Tiger Valiant, the soldiers of the other kingdoms in the valley would be slaughtered. Each of the 30,000 cultivators was given a standard flying sword, which was divided into 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, with 6,000 of each. These cultivators were divided into 5 teams. Apart from being given flying swords of the 5 elements, each team was given a special magical treasure. The cultivators with metal flying swords were given a 3 feet long flying knife, which would unleash thousands of blade beams to kill people in the air. The cultivators with wood flying swords were given a green calabash, which would unleash strong winds and thunderbolts to attack people when it was opened. The cultivators with earth flying swords were given an apricot yellow flag, which would unleash countless hills to smash people when it was waved. The cultivators with water flying swords were given a small pitch-black bowl, which would unleash a black torrent to sweep people away. The cultivators with fire flying swords were given a red pinwheel, which would unleash a red flame to burn people when it spun. While Wu Tianming was busy buying clothes and provisions, Gigu Zi had led the 30,000 cultivators, who were divided into 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, to practice the formation in the south drill ground. Everyone had to advance and retreat according to the 5 elements, and no one was allowed to make a mistake. Although they had not yet activated their magical treasures, they could already draw the energy of the 5 elements as they advanced and retreated, which created a 5-colored halo on the drill ground. This formation was what Gigu Zi called the 5 Elements Immortal Slaughtering Formation. It was an ordinary formation in his eyes, but when used properly, it could easily turn a gold immortal into a pool of blood. In the valley where Great Wu was located, such a formation was an unstoppable killing formation. Just as everyone was busy and calculating, a month quickly passed. On this day, Wu Dihao could not help but bring a large group of generals to the south drill ground. As soon as he entered, he cried out, "Seniors, if you have no intention to serve Great Wu, why don't you leave as soon as possible? A month has passed, and you've wasted countless provisions and military resources. Are you joking with Great Wu?" When he saw Wu Qi, he made an extremely generous offer. If Wu Qi and his companions left Great Wu now and admitted that they had lost the bet, he would most likely not ask for their flying swords, magic treasures, and spirit herbs, as long as they never came back. He could even open Great Wu's treasury and let Wu Qi and his companions take whatever they wanted. All he wanted was for Wu Qi and his companions to leave. Chapter 920. The content of the ultimatum was simple: Great Wu urged them to surrender to Great Wu unconditionally as soon as possible, and their monarchs would not lose their titles of marquises. If they did not, wherever Great Wu's mighty army went, blood would flow and corpses would pile up like mountains, and all the blame would be placed on the monarchs. The armors, weapons, flying swords, and magical treasures crafted by MOD were also distributed to the 100,000 soldiers. When they were inspected by Wu Tianming, the mighty and murderous aura of the army made Wu Tianming smile and Wu Dihao suck in a cold breath. Wu Dihao stared at Wu Qi stiffly, and the hot sweat on his body had turned into cold sweat. Wu Qi took 2 steps forward and slowly put his face in front of Wu Dihao's, their noses almost touching. Wu Qi stared into Wu Dihao's eyes and said slowly, "What can you do if I don't leave? Kill me? Do you have the strength to do that? Or?" With a contemptuous smile, Wu Qi said sarcastically, "Do you have the guts to do that?" Wu Dihao, who was trembling with anger, felt a surge of hot blood rolling in his chest. He wanted to roar with rage, and he wanted to draw his sword and stab Wu Qi in the chest. But he really did not dare to do that to Wu Qi. Looking down condescendingly at Wu Dihao, Wu Qi said indifferently, "I've already taken an emperor as my disciple, and I don't mind taking another regent as my disciple. Wu Dihao, kowtow to me and serve Tianming's disciple obediently from now on." He's still young, and Great Wu needs an old minister like you to assist him." The 3 imperial advisors were cleared, and Regent Wu Dihao obediently handed over 80% of his power, restoring his original title of King Wu. Wu Dihao, King Wu of Wu, was also the commander-in-chief of Great Wu's army. Nominally, he had the power to mobilize Great Wu's army, but in fact, it was just a title. All the military power was in Wu Tianming's hands, and without his edict, he could mobilize no more than 100,000 soldiers. Wu Qi's behavior was very much in line with Wu Tianming's intentions. He was very relieved that his uncle controlled the army in the capital. Wu Tianming's mother was conferred the title of Empress Dowager, and his uncle became a general. For a time, his mother's clan became one of the most powerful clans in Great Wu. This also satisfied his vanity, and he grew closer to Wu Qi. Because of Wu Qi's bad taste, Wu Tianming's 2 maternal uncles were conferred the title of Great Wu's left and right generals, and Wu Qi gave up 2 9-rotations fire pills to change their tendons, cleanse their marrows, and improve their cultivation bases. A few days ago, they were a pair of butchers who slaughtered pigs and sold dogs, but today, they had become generals of the dynasty with the cultivation base of gold immortals, commanding 2 armies, the Imperial Army and the Capital Guard. The wonders of life stunned Wu Tianming's 2 maternal uncles for days, and they could not recover from their shock. As soon as the word integrity came out of his mouth, Gigu Zi, who was training the 30,000 cultivators, coughed violently. It had been a month since he helped Wu Tianming take control of Great Wu's power. The 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation he had trained had taken shape. The 30,000 cultivators advanced and retreated in a strict formation, and the energies of the 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other, giving rise to endless mysteries. Once the formation was activated, it would have the power to shatter heaven and earth. According to Gigu Zi, the formation was ready to be used. When the emperors, who were furious after receiving the ultimatum, heard that Great Wu had only sent 100,000 troops to fight, they all laughed their heads off. The Emperor of Xi, who was the commander-in-chief of the allied forces, was even more relieved. He marched slowly with his army of nearly 10 million toward the northern border, and broke through the border before Wu Qi's army and invaded Great Wu's territory. There was also a change in Great Wu's inner palace. Wu Tianming's mother was conferred the title of Empress Dowager, equal to the current Empress Dowager. Wu Qi and his 2 companions were conferred the title of Imperial Advisor, and a group of flattering civil and military officials gave each of them the title of Imperial Advisor. For example, Wu Qi's title of Imperial Advisor had a total of 108 characters, and among them, there were all sorts of abstruse words such as divine manifestation, spiritual response, heavenly secret, abstruse, ethereal, profound insight, and many others. A great change was taking place in Great Wu's dynasty. He was a real almighty expert, an almighty expert who could dominate the rise and fall of a dynasty. According to the information obtained by Great Wu's spies, all the kingdoms would assemble an all-out army to attack Great Wu in half a month, and the commander-in-chief of the allied forces was the Emperor of Xi, the strongest kingdom in the valley after Great Wu. The allied forces numbered nearly 10 million, and when they met, they would pass through Xi and head straight for Great Wu's southern border. At the end of the ultimatum, Wu Tianming solemnly told the emperors that if they did not want to surrender, they could join forces to attack Great Wu. No matter how many kingdoms they sent, Great Wu would take them on with its own strength. Behind him was a cauldron that stood over 1,000 feet tall, constantly spitting out iron ores. The huge cauldron was spraying out raging flames, making it look like a flaming mountain towering behind him. A breeze swirled around Wu Qi, fluttering his green Daoist robe. With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi looked at the anxious Wu Dihao and shook his head gently. The most important thing in life is faith. Gritting his teeth, Wu Dihao stared at Wu Qi and said with a sneer, "You don't want to leave, Senior Immortal?" In the past few days, Wu Tianming had also decided on his empress and 2 imperial consorts. All 3 of them were from the top aristocratic families in Great Wu, and after the marriage was decided, Wu Tianming's support in the imperial court would be greater. Wu Dihao stole a glance at Wu Qi, his eyes filled with fear. They had tested the quality of the soldiers' armors and weapons. Even the best heaven immortal artifact crafted by the artificer with the highest cultivation base in Great Wu could not break their armors, and the meteors summoned by the few supreme oracles from the sky could not break their armors. This was an indestructible army. As Wu Qi had said, he was scared, terrified, and even began to despair. Wu Qi's heaven-defying means had frightened him, and some news from the palace had terrified him even more. The means and divine abilities Wu Qi and his companions had shown over the past few days were unheard of and unseen. Even those immortals who taught them the various divine abilities and mystic arts of Great Wu in ancient times did not seem to be as amazing as Wu Qi. After the army of 100,000 was properly trained, at Wu Qi's suggestion, Great Wu sent messengers to the other kingdoms in this valley with an ultimatum. On top of that, at Wu Qi's order, the army of 100,000 soldiers deliberately beat gongs and drums, shining brightly along the way like a peacock in heat, showing off its beautiful tail. With that, the spies of the allied forces could easily find out the background of the army of 100,000 without taking any risks. Wu Dihao's face suddenly turned purple-black. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth as he said, "What do you mean, Senior Immortal?" This was a war with a huge disparity between the total number of troops, and the funny thing was that both sides thought they were going to win. Wronged? Humiliated? A man is as timid as a eunuch? Wu Qi raised his eyebrows and sneered at Wu Dihao, who was shivering and sweating all over. Are you afraid after seeing what Lao Tzu has done these days? Are you afraid? Are you afraid of death? Are you afraid of losing all your wealth and glory? Are you afraid that your wife and children will be sold as slaves? TSK, how can a prince regent who dares to bully his nephew and seize the power of the imperial court be such a coward? In a hilly area that stretched for thousands of miles with lush vegetation, the army of 100,000 led by Wu Qi finally encountered an allied army of nearly 10 million. Almost on the third day after the ultimatum was sent out, messengers from various countries came and went one after another, flying back and forth over the valley, and countless private transactions were taking shape. 7 days later, Great Wu's neighbors signed an alliance, and their monarchs swore at the same time that they would work together to destroy Great Wu first in the face of Great Wu's provocation. Wu Qi snorted coldly and did not answer his question. Wu Dihao hurriedly kowtowed dozens of times and obediently addressed Wu Qi as his master. Wu Qi waited until his head had smashed into the ground and left a basin-sized hole, then kicked him to his feet. He whispered a few words to Wu Dihao, and the latter nodded repeatedly in agreement. Then, he hurried out with a group of generals. The messengers sent out returned a day later, and all of them had their noses and ears cut off. As expected, the monarchs who received the ultimatum flew into a rage. They ordered the messengers' ears and noses to be cut off as a sign of humiliation, and at the same time, they replied to Great Wu's ultimatum with almost the same words: since Great Wu was seeking death, all the kingdoms would take it as their own and divide their land. Wu Dihao fell to his knees in front of Wu Qi with a thud, his proud forehead touching Wu Qi's cloud boots as he cried out in a hoarse voice, "Please forgive me, Senior Immortal. From now on, I will return all my power to His Majesty. I only ask, only ask." No one could read such a long title in one go, so Wu Qi and his companions were shortened to Imperial Advisor 7 Kills, Imperial Advisor Greed, and Imperial Advisor Vanquisher, or according to Wu Qi's self-proclaimed seniority, they were called Grand Advisor, Second Advisor, and Third Advisor. Wu Qi said lightly, "A man cannot stand without his word, so since the bet has been made, I must fulfill it. Even if I lose everything, I still have to complete the bet that I'm qualified to make." What the regent said just now shows that he has underestimated the integrity of us 3 brothers. As the spies continued to send back news, Wu Qi and his companions left the capital with 100,000 well-trained soldiers and headed for the southern border to fight. Wu Dihao shuddered. With a smile on his face, he looked up and asked humbly, "Are you willing to forgive me, Immortal Master?" He could not help but feel lucky that he had returned the power to Wu Tianming quickly. Otherwise, he would have to fight against such a freakish army. At the thought of all kinds of terrible consequences, he was glad that he had decided to join Wu Qi as soon as possible. Chapter 921. Great Wu's army had their backs to the water, and behind them was a great lake that stretched for hundreds of miles. In front of the camp were two hills, each hundreds of meters tall and stretching for tens of miles, encircling the camp like two arms. Between the two hills was a valley about 30 miles wide. The rich natural energy and fertile land on Pangu continent had made the grass in the valley lush, and the waist-high grass was rolling in the wind. 100 miles across the valley was the Allied army's camp led by the Monarch of Sea. The camps of the Alliance of Seven Kingdoms were neatly built, with trenches, fences, watchtowers, barricades, and traps laid out with textbook precision, such as trenches, fences, watchtowers, arrow towers, barricades, and traps. Around the camp were oracles who were laying out restrictive formations and other restrictive formations. With these, it would be difficult for Great Wu's soldiers to sneak into the camp and launch sneak attacks. In total, there were more than 200 supreme oracles of the Seven Kingdoms. Hovering proudly over the camp with 7-storied pagodas above their heads, they looked down at Great Wu's camp. Some supreme oracles were pointing and laughing as if they were calculating how long it would take to completely wipe out the army of 100,000 soldiers. It had to be a total annihilation. Even a complete defeat was an unacceptable result. If an army of nearly 10 million attacked a camp of 100,000 soldiers in one battle, how could the higher-ups of the alliance keep their faces? In order to attack Great Wu, the Seven Kingdoms had not only deployed all their active armies, but also rearmed all their reservists and retired veterans. With so much manpower and material resources spent, this battle had to be a battle of annihilation. Wu Qi and the others were also standing on a watchtower in the camp, looking out at the allied camp in the distance. Wu Tianming and Wu Dihao were standing next to the three of them, looking in surprise at the vast encampment that stretched as far as the eye could see. After looking for a long time, Wu Tianming could no longer restrain his curiosity, and finally asked the question that had been lingering in his mind for a long time, "Master, why can an ultimatum attract the alliance of Seven Kingdoms to attack with all their strength?" Wu Qi rolled his eyes at Wu Tianming. He was too lazy to answer such an idiotic question. Was there even a need to ask? Who told Great Wu to be the strongest kingdom in this valley? Who told you to boast about annexing the other 7 kingdoms? Who told you to issue an ultimatum to provoke us? This was similar to the Warring States period when the 6 kingdoms joined forces to attack the Qin kingdom several times. If you were the strongest, the weaklings would definitely join forces to beat you up. Was there a need to explain such a problem? Wu Qi was too lazy to explain, and so was Mod with his head tilted to one side. Gue Guzi was the only one who was fond of imparting knowledge and dispelling doubts. He carefully analyzed the competitive relationship between the kingdoms in the valley for Wu Tianming, as well as the life-or-death situation between them. He analyzed to Wu Tianming how much psychological pressure Great Wu's strength had put on the other kingdoms, and that once Great Wu showed signs of annexing other kingdoms, it would arouse the vigilance and fear of the other kingdoms in the valley. Not only Wu Tianming, but even Wu Dihao and the other ministers of Great Wu listened to Gue Guzi's lecture with great interest. Some of Gue Guzi's perspectives and viewpoints were things they would never have thought of even in their wildest dreams. Now that Gue Guzi had analyzed them one by one, everyone felt enlightened and felt that they had made great progress in the field of diplomatic relations. Wu Tianming and the others regarded Wu Qi and his companions as deities. Wu Qi had once boasted that Gue Guzi was proficient in politics and military affairs, and now that they had seen him with their own eyes, he knew that his reputation was well-deserved. Wu Tianming could not help but feel complacent. How lucky he was. He had invited 3 almighty experts to join Great Wu just because he was bored and went out for a stroll. This was a sign of Great Wu's strength. Thinking of the saying that was circulating among the kingdoms, Wu Tianming vaguely felt that maybe he was really the new emperor of the human race, the best candidate for the sacred emperor of the human race. At the thought of the glorious future of the legendary sacred emperor of the human race, Wu Tianming felt hot all over. A dull clatter of hooves rang out as a dozen generals of the coalition swarmed toward them with thousands of cavalrymen. A dark-skinned general with a spear in his hand cried out from a distance, "Is there any hero in the vast Wu kingdom who dares to fight me one-on-one?" Clearly, these people were sent by the Allied forces to spy on Great Wu's strength. If there was not even one expert in Great Wu's army who could defeat these people, they would be surrounded by the enemy, and the army would soon be wiped out. Wu Dihao arched an eyebrow and cried out excitedly, "I." While the word, "I," was still rolling on his lips, Wu Qi flicked his sleeve and sent a gust of dark, chilly wind across the ground. Amidst the whistling of the wind, the hooves of the cavalrymen's mounts went limp. As soon as the wind blew past them, they shuddered, and all their strength suddenly drained out of their pores. A dull thud rang out, and a large amount of turf flew up into the air. Thousands of cavalrymen fell to the ground in a sorry state. Their horses were flipped upside down, and their hooves were in the air. Thousands of mounts and cavalrymen crashed into each other and squeezed into each other. The valley was instantly thrown into chaos. The dark-skinned general who had just provoked Wu Qi was the unluckiest. His limbs were weak, and his spear flew out of his hand. It spun twice in the air, and when he fell forward, the tip of the spear was pointed at his throat. He curled up and slammed into it, and the spear pierced his neck. A general with the cultivation base of the 8 stars realm of the second Pangu heaven had died so unjustly. At first, there was a dead silence in Great Wu's camp, but then a burst of laughter suddenly broke out. Wu Qi clapped his hands lightly and said in a flat voice, "They are useless. Tonight is the night they die. Why do we still need to do anything?" Before his voice had died away, tens of thousands of cavalrymen galloped out of the Allied army's camp, turning into a dark cloud as they charged toward Great Wu's camp. Wu Qi snorted coldly. He lightly waved his fingers, recited a few incantations, and blew out a breath. A strong gust of wind rose from the ground, followed by a series of deafening cracking noises. Suddenly, all the long grasses in the valley were torn from their roots. These blades of grass, which were around 3 feet in length and as thin as paper, all released piercing light as they rose up into the air. They circled in the air like countless longswords, then hurtled toward the tens of thousands of cavalrymen as streaks of green light that were several tens of feet in length. Shrill howls towered into the sky. Before the tens of thousands of cavalrymen could react, the blades of grass, which were strengthened by Wu Qi's magic, had ripped through their armors, muscles, bones, blood vessels, and meridians like sharp swords, ripping them into countless pieces. He had only used the magic power equivalent to that of an 18th-tier heaven immortal, but his attainment was so profound that the structure of all the grass and leaves had undergone subtle changes with his attainment that was close to the realm of Tao fusing. The once fragile blades of grass had become 100 times harder than diamonds, and their sharpness was not inferior to that of ordinary gold immortal artifacts. Hundreds of millions of blades of grass grew in the valley, and they fell like raindrops. The strongest among these cavalrymen was only at the 3rd star realm of the first Panga heaven. How could they withstand such a brutal attack? The valley was soaked with fresh blood. Wu Qi slapped his palms together, and all the long grasses that flew up into the air were crushed into powder and sprinkled onto the bare ground. The ground rippled like water, and all the broken pieces of flesh and blood were swallowed into the ground. As he murmured an incantation in a low voice, new grass sprouts sprouted in the valley. Before long, these sprouts had grown into waist-high blades of grass, as if the brutal killing had never happened. The cavalrymen, who had been thrown to the ground, rose to their feet in embarrassment. When they saw the brutal killing behind them, all of them were scared out of their wits and rushed back to their camps. Thousands of men ran blindly back to their camps. Their cultivation bases were very good, and they ran very fast. It only took them a few breaths of time to cover the distance of tens of miles, and soon, they were outside their own camps. Wu Qi gently flicked his finger and said coolly, "Kill." A series of puffing noise could be heard without an end. Right before the gate of the camp, countless thumb-thick, sharp thorns abruptly darted out from the soil within miles in radius. The pitch-black earth thorns pierced deep into the bodies of these fleeing soldiers, leaving countless holes on their bodies. Some of the thorns even pierced into their heads, piercing into their brains and crushing their brains, completely cutting off their life force. The 200 or so supreme oracles hovering over the Allied camp sucked in their breaths in horror. Subconsciously, they flew back thousands of feet. Wu Qi's elusive magic had given them a great sense of terror out of nowhere. These oracles were strategic combat forces cultivated by the people of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League for their respective kingdoms. But, the inheritance they had received was extremely limited, and they only knew a few unchanging magic. They had never seen spells as mysterious as Wu Qi's. The allied army's camp quieted down, and no one came out to provoke Great Wu's camp again. Thousands of miserable corpses were propped up by earth spikes at the entrance of the allied army's camp, standing there with an ominous aura like thousands of tombstones. No one in the camp came out to clean up the corpses. Everyone in the allied army had been scared out of their wits by Wu Qi, and they would not act rashly until they could come up with a good plan to deal with him. Great Wu's camp, on the other hand, was filled with cheers. Thousands of mounts who had lost their masters were dragged back to the camp. At Wu Qi's order, these huge mounts were all killed, and their fattest meat was picked out and made into roast meat and broth. Vats of fine wine were pushed out, and everyone began to drink and enjoy themselves from dusk until the moon was high in the sky. The unrestrained drinking made more than half of the soldiers in the camp fall to the ground drunk. The scouts who were watching Great Wu's camp from the grass in the distance breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Great Wu would not be able to launch an attack today. What they had seen and heard was sent back to the allied army, and the higher-ups of the allied army breathed a sigh of relief. In the middle of the night, a great plume of water vapor rose from the great lake behind Great Wu's camp. Dark clouds rose into the sky and blotted out the moon, and the faint chirping of insects rang out in the grass. When the scouts heard the chirping, their eyelids could hardly open as if they were glued. They struggled hard, but they still succumbed to the tide-like drowsiness. Great Wu's army of 100,000 soldiers readied their armor and weapons. With 30,000 cultivators in the front, 70,000 soldiers divided into 71,000-man teams, led by Wu Dihao and other generals, they formed a crescent-shaped formation and quietly marched toward the allied army. Gigu Zi walked alone at the forefront of the army, casually stepping on the tips of the grasses and riding the wind. Wherever he went, all the formations and restrictive spells set up by the oracles of the allied army would silently vanish into nothingness. Chapter 922. Like a ghost, Gigu Zi walked to the heart of the allied army's camp, which stretched for hundreds of miles. There happened to be an oval-shaped hill protruding hundreds of feet from the ground. Standing on it, Gigu Zi casually threw hundreds of upper-grade immortal stones to the ground. With ease, he waved his fingers and drew numerous primordial runes in the air. The runes drilled into the ground like living creatures and quickly communicated with the underground energy veins of various sizes. Like blood vessels, the energy veins began to wriggle and twist, and then, following Gigu Zi's will, formed a huge and equally powerful no-fly formation within 1,000 miles. It's fair. Everyone is fighting on the ground. It's fair. Gigu Zi smiled. A cloud rushed out from under his feet and carried him up into the sky. He was the one who constructed the no-fly formation. Those whose cultivation base was weaker than him could not fly within its range, but he himself was not affected at all. A large black bird flew over silently. On the back of this hundreds of meters wide bird, Mod was sitting with his legs crossed. A small table was placed in front of him, on top of which, there was a small wine pot, 2 small wine cups, and 4 plates of cold dishes. Gigu Zi sat down opposite Mod. The 2 old men drank wine and ate dishes happily, watching what was about to happen in the allied army's camp down below. A few secret compartments under the bird's abdomen were opened, and about 15 kilograms of drunken dragon incense concocted by Wu Qi drifted down. The sentries standing on the watchtowers in the allied army's camp were drunk, and before long, they were snoring thunderously. The incense was not enough to knock out all the allied soldiers, but it was more than enough to knock out the sentries standing on high ground. Without the disturbance of the sentries, Great Wu's army quietly approached the allied army's camp until they came to the edge of the trench. Fire element cultivators quickly stepped out of the 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation and produced the palm-sized red windmills Mod had built for them. Along with a series of shrill swishing noise, these windmills spun swiftly against the wind and released fiery dragons, roaring towards the camp of the allied army. These were not ordinary fires of the secular world, but the earth core fire that MOD had meticulously refined. The fire was scorching hot and sticky, just like magma. Once it was attached to one's body, it would linger, and it would not stop until it burned everything into ashes. The hundreds of miles of flaming dragons burned from the north to the south. The tents in the Allied army's camp were set ablaze, and before long, tens of thousands of tents were engulfed in a sea of fire. As soon as the fire element cultivators moved, the wood element cultivators strode after them. They produced their little green gourds and recited an incantation, causing a gust of green wind to burst out of the gourds' mouths. Fueled by the wind, the red flames rose thousands of feet into the sky, turning into a wall of flame and of fire, of the flames, and burned toward the south. What was even more frightening was that countless bull-sized, 10 feet long, cyan-colored wooden stakes were flying out of this gale. These wooden stakes, which were sparkling with a faint electric light, were immediately engulfed by the earth flame. They looked like real wood, but in fact, they were the condensation of the divine thunder of wood. Once they hit the ground, they exploded into pieces with a thunderous boom. These wooden stakes looked like real wood, but they were actually formed by the green wood divine thunder. Once they hit the ground, there would be a thunderous boom, and everything within a radius of 100 feet would explode into pieces. For a moment, nearly half of the Allied army's camp was engulfed in flames. Soldiers ran and screamed in terror as they rushed toward places where there was no fire. For a moment, nearly half of the Allied army's camp was engulfed in flames. Soldiers ran and screamed in terror as they rushed toward places where there was no fire. Some priests rushed out of the tents and tried to fly into the air, but Gueguzi's enormous anti-air formation made it impossible for them to get even half a foot off the ground. A strange force enveloped an area of 1,000 miles. No one could fly in the air unless their cultivation base was stronger than Gueguzi's. The oracles were stunned, but the metal cultivators in the 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation had already rushed forward. 6,000 crescent moon-shaped flying daggers soared into the sky along with shrill whistling sounds. Every time the daggers spun, a round crescent-shaped dagger light would fall from the sky. The flying daggers spun faster and faster, and the number of blade lights they shot out increased. In just a blink of an eye, the sky was filled with blade lights, and a series of slashing noises could be heard. Those oracles who were standing on the ground and trying to fly up into the air only saw a blur in front of their eyes, and in the blink of an eye, the blade lights were already in front of them. Like a sharp knife cutting grass, groups of Allied soldiers were killed by the knife lights, wailing and screaming. The knife lights were only aimed at their necks. Pillars of blood rose into the sky in the dark night, and countless heads were sent flying high into the air by the powerful force of the knife lights. Every wave of saber light brought down thousands of heads. The pitch-black human heads danced in the air, and the nightmarish scene was enough to drive anyone crazy. Furious roars could be heard as hundreds of generals finally gathered a large group of soldiers. Armed with weapons and armors, the soldiers formed a battle formation and were about to launch a counterattack to the north. Meanwhile, a few supreme oracles with 7-storied pagodas over their heads were reciting incantations, casting restrictive spells on the soldiers that could defend them against spiritual attacks. It was one of the few restrictive spells that these supreme oracles from outer heavenly realms knew. But the nightmare came. The earth element cultivators in the 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation roared and charged forward. As they waved the apricot yellow flags in their hands, the ground rumbled and rich earth element energy gathered in the sky. Accompanied by the despairing howls of the Allied soldiers, mountains several miles high came whistling down from the sky. The mountains were so heavy that all the soldiers who were smashed under them were flattened into meat pies. One mountain after another came crashing down, and the soldiers who had formed a dense formation and were preparing to counterattack became the best targets. Every mountain that came crashing down would take the lives of thousands of people. A series of thudding noises could be heard, sounding like the sound of a lute being played. Mountains smashed into the camp one after another, destroying a great number of camps and killing countless warriors. The Allied soldiers cried and screamed as they fled to the south. The higher-ups of the Allied forces could no longer control them, and even the monarchs and generals of some kingdoms had abandoned their soldiers and fled first. In this dark night where one could not even see their own fingers, where no one could escape with the help of sword beams or the art of riding clouds, it was not a wise choice to fight such a powerful enemy. Like ghosts, cultivators of water element poured out of the dense black mist. The bowls in their hands poured down, sending black waves to engulf the Allied camp from all directions. The black water washed the bodies of the Allied soldiers, and the biting cold waves took away their energy and courage. What made them even more desperate was that the black water was so penetrating that the ground was turned into sticky mud by the wash, and eventually turned into a glue-like swamp. The fleeing Allied soldiers found that their bodies were gradually sinking into the ground, first their ankles, then their calves, then their thighs, and finally their waists. A large number of soldiers were trapped in the swamp. They screamed in despair and begged their companions to pull them out of this nightmarish place. But their companions were also sucked in by the swamp. Everyone was struggling, but the more they struggled, the deeper they sank. Even the oracles who could have flown up into the sky were swallowed up by the swamp, crying and screaming. The Allied camp was in complete chaos. The command system was completely destroyed, and no one could control a single soldier anymore. The 5 elements immortal slaughtering formation rushed into the camp. Thunder and fire splashed in all directions, and raging flames billowed into the sky. Mountains fell down one after another, and countless blades danced in the air, mercilessly killing the soldiers trapped in the swamp. Deafening battle cries came from all directions as Great Wu's soldiers, divided into 70 teams, rushed into the Allied camp, shouting slogans. Like 70 indestructible steel blades, they gave the Allied army a fatal blow. Some of the coalition soldiers stood in front of Great Wu's soldiers, but they soon realized how terrible they were. Their armors were indestructible, and their weapons were indestructible. The Allied army's weapons and armors were easily torn apart like tofu in front of their seemingly ordinary weapons, and their lives were torn apart as well. Dark clouds blotted out the sky, and not a single ray of light shone down. There were only flames and lightning flashing in the vast camp. Great Wu's 70,000 soldiers were reaping countless lives like devils from hell. They were nothing more than nearly 10 million soldiers, and as long as each of them swung their blades 100 times, they could kill all the enemies. So what if they swung their blades 100 times? These soldiers, whose cultivation bases had skyrocketed, could swing their blades 100 times in just a snap of a finger. The enemy could not hurt them, and they could hurt the enemy as much as they wanted. This was a one-sided war, a one-sided slaughter. They fought from night to dawn, from dawn to night, and from night to dawn. In this camp, which was nearly 1,000 miles in circumference, Great Wu's soldiers killed to their heart's content for 2 days and 2 nights. The enemies hiding in caves and hills were found and killed mercilessly. The whole camp was razed to the ground, and all the military supplies and money became Great Wu's spoils of war. None of the enemies, including the monarch of sea, managed to escape. Of course, the restrictive formation played a great role, and the maze formation Wu Qi had laid out outside the camp had cut off all hope of escape for the Allied soldiers. When the bodies of the monarchs of the 7 states were brought to Wu Tianming, when the heads of thousands of generals were piled up into a terrible monument, and when the bodies of all the Allied soldiers were burned to ashes, Great Wu's unharmed soldiers raised their weapons at the same time and shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" Wu Tianming's face was flushed with excitement. He raised his hands and shouted to Wu Qi and the others who were hovering over the battlefield, "Master, long live the imperial advisor!" Wu Dihao led all the generals and knelt respectfully in front of Wu Tianming. At this moment, he had no other thoughts. The Allied forces of the 7 states were wiped out, and Great Wu's prosperity was right in front of him. After unifying this valley, Great Wu would be able to unite the forces of the 7 states, walk out of this valley, and launch an attack on the vast Panga continent. Perhaps the legendary new emperor of the human race, the sacred emperor of the human race, was Wu Tianming. Who knew? Perhaps it was him. 3 days later, the imperial clansmen and ministers of the 7 states, who learned that the Allied forces had been wiped out, surrendered, and Great Wu effortlessly expanded the territories and people of the 7 states. At the imperial court meeting a month later, Wu Qi put forward a clear strategic goal. Step out of the valley and sweep Panga continent. Chapter 923. We can't let our disciples die in vain. You must pay the price, said Black Emperor in a cold voice. Among the three, the one in the middle was clad in a green robe, shrouded in a green mist. He had a lean face and an extraordinary bearing. The one on the left was clad in a silver robe, about 10 feet tall and burly like a lion. His eyes gleamed as he glanced around, and his gaze was as sharp as a blade. The one on the right was clad in a black robe, thin and tall, with a feminine face and eyes that shone with an indescribable ruthlessness. Emperor Haozuan's face flickered, and he asked respectfully, "May I ask what justice you want, Your Majesty?" Green Emperor shook his head with a smile and said, "Your Majesty, are you not going to reason with us?" Emperor Haozuan fell silent for a while, carefully considering his words, and then said slowly, "Please take a seat, Your Majesty. The palace has a special wine made by Empress Hua Palace, a rare wine, and all kinds of immortal fruits produced by Mount Kunlun. Since Your Majesty is being unreasonable, don't blame us for demanding justice ourselves." White Emperor said coldly. Du bowed his head. The green-robed man was the Eastern Green Emperor, the silver-robed man was the Western White Emperor, and the black-robed man was the Northern Black Emperor. All of them were figures who had existed since Pangu created the world, true gods condensed from the laws of the heavenly Tao, mighty almighty experts who represented the leaders of the three major powers. After a moment of silence, Emperor Haozuan said solemnly, "Your Majesty, don't you know the cause and effect of this matter? The children of your sex were killed by Great Yu by mistake. What I don't understand is why your disciples are among Yu's enemies." From the west, a beam of silver light shot over. This beam of silver light was extremely bright and thin, only 1,000 miles long. As it tore through the air, it brought with it an ear-piercing screech. Wherever it passed, it left an eye-catching black mark in the void. This was the mark left behind by the silver light, which could not be healed after a long time. The speed of the silver light was frighteningly fast, at least 10 times faster than the green light and the black wave. The military towns along the way could not even catch up with it, let alone stop it. Slapping the armrest of his throne, Emperor Haozuan snapped, "Recruit soldiers, train new soldiers, arm the army at all costs, even if we have to empty the treasury. After wiping out all the rebels and those foreign powers, you." Emperor Haozuan's heart sank. The reason why he killed the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance was finally acting up today. In the light screen, from the east, a flood dragon-shaped stream of cyan mist stretched for tens of thousands of miles, rushing towards Liangzhu along with a roaring gale. Along the way, blinding beams of light flashed past the military fortresses. These fortresses were surrounded by restrictive formations that made it difficult for ordinary immortals to fly through. However, wherever this streak of azure chi passed through, all of the restrictive formations crumbled at the same time, and even the walls of some of the military towns cracked and caved in. Hundreds of tiny purple light spots flew around the green chi, but as soon as the green chi twisted its body, dozens of light spots were knocked to the ground. These were the military officers of Du stationed in various fortresses, and even the weakest of them had the cultivation base of the 9 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. However, in front of this green energy, they were like ants beside a giant dragon. They were easily knocked down and had no power to resist. King Xian Shan, who had settled down in the southern region of Du, announced the establishment of New Yu under the banner of the human emperor, accusing Du of being a decadent and degenerate dynasty. For the future of mankind, New Yu would replace Du, and King Xian Shan would lead the human race to the light. Looking up at the ceiling of Yuxiong Palace, Emperor Haozuan gritted his teeth and said, "Du will attack the 33 heavens, wipe out the celestial court, and then attack the great vulture mountain. I'll let those people know that the human race is not something they can play with at will." Emperor Haozuan was shocked, and the courtiers in the great hall were horrified. Long Mo, standing beside Emperor Haozuan, snorted coldly and clapped his hands. A light screen fell from the ceiling, showing a vast expanse of green mountains and clear waters. If one took a closer look, it was the terrain around Yuxiong Plain. Emperor Haozuan gently waved his hand to stop Long Mo from risking his life. 3 emperors have come from afar, he cried out in a low voice. Forgive me for not welcoming you earlier. Emperor Haozuan rose to his feet, flew down from the throne, cupped his fist, and bowed deeply to the 3 emperors. The current human emperor, Emperor Haozuan, offers greetings to the 3 emperors. While Wu Qi was building his power in Great Wu, Panga continent was in complete chaos. All the courtiers in the court felt their blood boil when they heard the words. King Yang Shan and all the courtiers bowed to Qi and answered in unison. We're here to seek justice from Yu, said Black Emperor in a cold voice. Just as Emperor Haozuan was about to give the order to mobilize the army to attack New Yu, an eunuch hurried into the Great Hall, bowed, and reported in an urgent voice, Your Majesty, urgent messages have come from the military towns in the east, north, and west of Yuxiong Plain at the same time. Someone has broken through the void, and the restrictive formations in the towns cannot stop them. Hundreds of their generals have been wounded. The Yuxiong army led by King Wei Shan, GAO, was sweeping through the provinces in Dayu's western region, teaching those human kingdoms from the outer heavenly realms a hard lesson from time to time. Several small kingdoms had been wiped out by him. But, his forces were hindered by the rebel army of Dayu led by King Xian Shan, so he could not freely mobilize the army to attack at will. With a gloomy face, Emperor Haozuan looked at the 3 ancient emperors who had turned and walked out of the Great Hall. Suddenly, he clapped his hands, and the gate of Yuxiong Palace was slammed shut with a loud boom. The 3 emperors turned to look at Emperor Haozuan in horror, and saw the emperor pull out the Xianyuan sword with clenched teeth. Once the foreign kingdoms of the human race grew strong, once those immortal sects had completely laid their foundations on Panga continent, it would be extremely difficult for Dayu to deal with them. Only by destroying New Yu with a thunderous force, killing all the rebels under King Xian Shan, and then mobilizing all the armies to wipe out all the foreign kingdoms and kill all the immortals could Dayu survive this crisis. After that, the 3 emperors flicked their sleeves, turned, and left. As they walked, they cried out in unison, In 3 days, our army will attack Dayu and seek justice for my disciples who died tragically. Emperor Haozuan's face was gloomy as he sat on the throne. The New Yu founded by his rebellious son had become Dayu's greatest threat. Located in the southern region, New Yu had a strong military force, and the number of high-grade supreme oracles exceeded that of Dayu. Without wiping out New Yu, Dayu would not be able to mobilize its army to deal with the human kingdoms that kept descending from outer heavenly realms, and the foreign immortals who filled the sky like locusts. As for the evidence of Dayu's decadence, King Xian Shan had sent countless subordinates to spread rumors in Dayu, saying that Emperor Haozuan was extravagant, lascivious, and had killed countless people, that the nobles of Dayu ate human flesh and drank human blood as wine, and that Emperor Haozuan killed 1,000 virgin boys and girls every day to make them into exquisite dishes. These rumors spread like a plague on Panga continent. How could the simple and honest people of Dayu tell the truth of these rumors? The whole continent was in a state of panic. Before the Great Change, Emperor Haozuan definitely did not have the cultivation base of Tao-breaking realm. In Yuxiong Palace, the courtiers of Dayu stared blankly at the restored jade dais, and they could not help but smile ecstatically. The human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms were attacking and annexing each other, fighting hard for the title of a human sacred emperor. The immortal sects from outer heavenly realms were also attacking each other, fighting fiercely for a blessed land. Although the total amount of natural energy in any mountain on Panga continent was 100 times more than that of a planet once occupied by these immortal sects, the greed of immortals was endless, and they always had their eyes on the best blessed land. Green Emperor twitched the corner of his mouth to show that he had laughed too much. Emperor Haozuan, give us 3 brothers a reason, he said in a deep voice. In the Great Hall, the courtiers of Dayu could not help but think when they saw this. Emperor Haozuan's move just now was clearly him reversing time in a small area, turning it back for a period of time. If time was sped up, anyone with the overall strength of a primordial expert could do it. However, turning back time was something that only Tao-breaking experts could do. Just now, Emperor Haozuan had the overall strength of a Tao-breaking expert without activating Liangzhu's defensive formation. Suddenly, the light screen flickered violently, and 3 mighty pressures poured out of it, accompanied by a deep roar that shook Long Mo and made him tremble. When the green energy, the black wave, and the silver light discovered that someone was spying on them with a divine ability, they fought back with a mystic art. Cold sweat broke out on Long Mo's forehead. He snorted coldly and was about to bite the tip of his tongue to strengthen the light screen with his blood essence. In the north, a black wave stretched for tens of thousands of miles as well. Countless pitch-black icebergs and snow-capped mountains floated in the wave, colliding with each other and causing deafening booms that shattered all the defensive formations in the towns along the way. Not only did the generals stationed in the towns not attack the black wave, but before they could get close, they were knocked unconscious by the deafening booms produced by the collision of the icebergs. Green Emperor narrowed his eyes and said with a cold grin, "All these years, the 3 of us have been cultivating in seclusion and ignoring the affairs of the outside world, and now you have come knocking on our door. A few years ago, you killed our sons. You must give us an explanation for this." A terrible pressure suddenly enveloped the whole city of Liangzhu, and then 3 figures appeared out of thin air in front of Yuxiong Palace. Emperor Haozuan's face darkened, and the jade platform under his feet cracked with a crack, covering it with cracks that looked like a spider web. He took a deep breath, and with a flash of starlight, the cracked platform closed inwardly. All the cracks quickly disappeared, and in the blink of an eye, the jade platform was restored to its original state. People of Deyu who lived near the southern region began to migrate there with their families. In New Yu's propaganda slogan, these people were forced to flee their homes because they were persecuted by Deyu. At the same time, all kinds of natural disasters kept appearing all over Deyu, including floods, droughts, plagues, and beasts. These disasters had greatly shaken the control of Deyu over the local provinces and kept weakening Deyu's strength. The 3 of them walked slowly into Yuxiong Palace and stopped about a mile away from Emperor Haozuan. White Emperor snorted coldly and interrupted Emperor Haozuan. "Don't bother with these useless things," he said coldly. "It's useless even if you bring up the Wahuang clan now. Even if she is the one with the greatest virtues in the universe, she can't protect the human race this time, fuck you. Since you are so unreasonable, why should I, Deyu, reason with you? Deyu's subjects, listen up. Let's kill them together." In Yuxiong Palace in the Imperial Palace of Liangzhu, Emperor Haozuan was convening his courtiers for a meeting, preparing to mobilize the army to attack New Yu. Chapter 924. In the 33 heavens, amidst the boundless bright light, the great celestial emperor, Ziwei Lingying, was holding a wine cup carved out of golden jade that was as thin as a cicada's wing, tasting the wine with great interest while watching the images appearing in the purple mirror hovering in the center of the great hall. Everything that happened in Yuxiong Palace in Liangzhu was displayed in the mirror, and no detail could escape his sharp eyes. There were countless restrictive spells inside and outside of Yuxiong Palace to prevent outsiders from peeping, but the fact that the purple mirror in front of him could so clearly reflect what was happening in the palace showed that either the mirror was incredibly powerful, or someone in Yuxiong Palace was secretly communicating with the celestial court. Either way, it was not good news for Deyu. With a smile on his face, the great celestial emperor narrowed his eyes and nodded repeatedly, applauding the attitude of the 3 emperors toward Deyu. He put down the wine cup, clapped his hands, and said in a low voice, "It's time for you to strike, you 3 cunning old fools. If you don't do it now, you won't even be able to smell the fruit, let alone get any benefit from it." After that, the great celestial emperor turned his misty eyes to the few beautiful female immortals standing in the great hall. These immortals had just ascended to the celestial court a few months ago, and they had been specially selected to serve the great celestial emperor. They were only 1,000 years old, and among the immortals, they were as tender as bamboo shoots that had just sprouted in spring, so tender that water could be squeezed out of them with a pinch. The complacent great celestial emperor suddenly felt a fire burning in his lower abdomen. He counted on his fingers and realized that his eldest son, Lord Baoang, had been lost for the sake of the celestial court's plan, so it seemed that he should add 1 or 2 more princes. After all, only by maintaining a sufficient number of princes could his children have enough competitive pressure and force them to work harder. The great celestial emperor was a qualified father who was very considerate of his children and grandchildren. Therefore, he felt that he needed to have 2 or 3 children, and these beautiful fairies were the best candidates. They were so beautiful, so young, and so charming. Moreover, the great celestial emperor was in a good mood at the moment, so it was suitable for something romantic to happen. With a casual point of his finger, one of the female immortals standing in the hall let out a cry, and her slender body flew uncontrollably into the great celestial emperor's arms. The great celestial emperor wrapped his arms around the immortal, then skillfully spread her slender legs with both hands. As he was about to go to her secret place, the scene of Emperor Haozuan drawing the Xianyuan sword and cursing suddenly appeared in the purple mirror. Stunned, the great celestial emperor let go of the beauty in his arms and picked his ear in surprise. Did he hear wrongly? Emperor Haozuan asked about the mothers of the 3 emperors. The human emperor would actually curse and directly greet someone's mother? The human emperor had actually closed the main gate of Yuxiong Palace and trapped the 3 emperors who had come to denounce him. Emperor Haozuan had even activated Liangzhu's defensive formation and mobilized the city's strongest defensive force to attack the 3 ancient emperors. This was too shameless. He had even asked Dayu's civil and military officials to join the siege. This was simply too shameless. What a shameless scum! As the human emperor, how could he do such a thing? Ziwei Lingying jumped to his feet in exasperation, pointing at the purple mirror and cursing loudly. He was simply a disgrace to the human race, a scum of the human race. As the human emperor, how could he do such a thing? Shouldn't the human emperor be traditional and conservative? Shouldn't he be a person who stuck to the old ways? Emperor Haozuan should have sent the 3 emperors away from Dayu's territory, then mobilized his army to defend the eastern, northern, and western borders, and fought the armies of the 3 emperors. How could he do such a thing? How could he take advantage of the fact that the 3 emperors had come to denounce him and attack the 3 emperors without any regard for the consequences? This is simply preposterous. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League could do such things, and they had done it many times, but how could Emperor Haozuan do such a thing? How could he be so shameless? The great Celestial Emperor was so angry that he slapped the golden dragon table in front of him to pieces, flicked his sleeve, and spun to leave. His graceful and noble face twisted and became extremely ferocious. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Fine, it would be best if those 3 old fools died in Liangzhu. Their sons are useless, and they can be used as pawns for the Celestial Court. It would be better if they died in Liangzhu." His eyes flickered as he immediately calculated how much benefit the Celestial Court would get if Dayu killed Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor. As long as the 3 emperors were alive, the Celestial Court could only negotiate with them on an equal footing and share the benefits. Once they were dead, the Celestial Court would be able to replace them as the ruler of the 3 emperors, and the benefits would be too great. Grinning coldly, the great Celestial Emperor casually pointed out a few streams of flame and transmitted his thoughts to the other 5 emperors. Very soon, sparks that were as thin as gossamer shot back. The 5 celestial emperors already knew what he was thinking, and were quickly deploying their troops to make all kinds of preparations. He hurried into the back hall and walked hundreds of feet along a corridor paved with transparent water essence. Suddenly, the great celestial emperor paused. He pondered for a moment, then flicked his sleeve and transformed into a beam of golden light that shot up into the sky, rushing out of the 33 heavens in the blink of an eye. As he moved, a palm-sized crescent-shaped jade pendant hung at his waist, emitted a bright light that enveloped him. Then, he teleported a great distance away and came to the entrance of the 9 heavens. The robe of heaven and earth disappeared, and he changed into a cloud-colored Taoist robe with an ordinary bronze sword on his back. Transforming into an ordinary cultivator, he brushed past the edge of the 9 heavens and flew toward the outer heavens, which were of a higher level. A white cloud flashed under his feet. The great celestial emperor moved at an incredible speed, and it did not take him long to cross the 9 heavens. The great celestial emperor flew high into the sky on a cloud. After passing through several teleportation formations set up in the boundless void, he finally came to a gray cloud. A solitary archway made of black jade, about 1,000 feet tall, stood in the cloud. The plaque in the middle of the archway was engraved with 3 bright blood-colored characters, Boundless Heaven. 3,000 gray statues stood under the archway, all in the shape of heavily armed soldiers. An indescribable evil aura lingered around them, which made the great celestial emperor shudder. With a cold snort, he produced a palm-sized black bone talisman and waved it at the statues. Then, he strode into the archway and disappeared in a flash of gray light. The great celestial emperor quietly emerged from a stretch of gray mountains and rivers. There was a sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, flowers, and trees, but everything was gray. Apart from gray, there was no other color. The void was lifeless. The wind didn't blow, the water didn't flow, the flowers didn't smell fragrant, and the birds didn't sing. It was as if everything had frozen at a certain point in time and would never change. Obviously, the great celestial emperor was not used to the environment here. He frowned and glanced around, then flew towards a towering, pyramid-shaped mountain in the distance. Along the way, he saw groups of strange-looking figures appearing on the mountaintops from time to time. Some of them had the bodies of horses and human heads, some had the bodies of snakes and human heads, some had several heads each, some had several bodies sharing one head, some were covered in black fur like gorillas, and some were as transparent as crystals. These strange-looking figures all looked evil. They chuckled as they looked at the great celestial emperor, who was flying across the sky. Some of them even took out strange-looking bone staffs and arrows, making gestures at the great celestial emperor. Their seemingly unintentional movements often made the great celestial emperor's back break out in a cold sweat and his facial muscles twitch. When he finally arrived in front of the mountain, the great celestial emperor cried out, Wu Xian, come out now." A deep and sticky goo-goo sound came from the ground, as a puddle of dark, oddly shaped things slowly slid down along the smooth surface of the mountain. The thing was about 100 miles in size, and it was hard to tell what it was. One could imagine it as a huge, flowing cancer cell, with a twisted face wriggling on every cell. This weird, disgusting, nightmare-inducing thing slowly slid down the mountain wall, letting out a sticky goo-goo sound. Finally, the thing slid to the same height as the great celestial emperor. Part of it slowly bulged up and condensed into something roughly similar to a human face. It opened its mouth and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter now? Haven't I sent a group of the best young men of my clan to help you?" The great celestial emperor's face turned cold. He shook his head bitterly and said, "It's a waste of the great manpower and resources of the celestial court. Wu Xian, the men you sent are really elites." The great celestial emperor's tone was not without complaint. Wu Xian sneered in a low voice and said, "You can't blame us. It's the celestial court's intelligence that is not accurate. I'm just taking advantage of my seniority. You are not as good as your ancestral master. When your ancestral master was the great celestial emperor of the celestial court, he helped us kill 3 human emperors in a row and stole a great deal of emperor aura." With his body boiling violently, Wu Xian laughed and said, "Just a little bit more emperor aura, just a little bit more, and that thing will be finished. Ha, it's a pity that the men you sent are not good enough, or they would have killed that Emperor Haozuan and seized his emperor aura, and that would have been a great contribution." The great celestial emperor's face turned a little unsightly. "Don't worry," he said in a deep voice, "I'll get you the emperor aura. This time, I'll have to trouble you to do it yourself." Wu Xian was taken aback. Shivering, he shrank into a ball and said in a strange voice, "You want me to do it myself? That's a big price. I can't waste even a little bit of energy essence when I'm going to craft that thing. How many good things are you going to ruin if you want me to do it myself?" The great celestial emperor said nonchalantly, "I've prepared the things. You just have to do it." After pondering for a moment, Wu Xian laughed in a hoarse voice and said, "Well, it's been a long time since I've done it myself. Who are you going to deal with? Let me make it clear first, everything in the cursed person's possession will belong to me." The great celestial emperor smiled, then lowered his voice and named the person he was going to curse. Chapter 925. In the newly built Imperial Advisor's residence on the east side of Great Wu's Imperial Palace, Wu Qi sat in a pavilion in the backyard. A small three-legged toad incense burner was placed next to him, and purple smoke was slowly puffing out of the toad's big mouth. A young eunuch with delicate features stood respectfully at Wu Qi's side, holding his breath and daring not to be careless. Just now, it was this little eunuch who brought Wu Qi a small jade slip in his palm. There was only one simple line of words in it. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary prose about scenery. However, after Wu Qi had decrypted it using the ciphertext codes he obtained from the intelligence agencies on Earth, he was able to find a concise piece of information. This young eunuch and another group of young eunuchs were born and bred in Great Wu. They had entered the palace when they were young, and they were loyal to Great Wu. However, ever since Wu Qi secretly taught these little eunuchs the great sun magic of Lao Ai, he had become the god in their hearts, the man they swore their loyalty to. The jade slip was delivered by the secret intelligence system of the East Sea, and it was encoded using Wu Qi's original method. So, even if someone intercepted the text, they would not be able to get anything of value from it. When immortals and Buddhas sent messages, they would only consider setting up countless restrictive spells on the jade slips to prevent outsiders' divine sense from invading them. But with the encryption system invented by Wu Qi, there was no need to add any restrictive spells to the jade slips used to deliver confidential information in the East Sea, and outsiders would never be able to figure out what was said in them. The unique way of transmitting information, coupled with the loyal young eunuchs, had allowed Wu Qi to maintain a close connection with the East Sea even though he was in Great Wu. Nothing about Deyu could be hidden from Wu Qi. The message in the jade slip now was only one sentence: the human emperor had besieged and killed the 3 emperors of the ancient gods. Playing with the jade slip in his hand, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and began to calculate carefully. Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor had gone to Liangzhu to denounce Emperor Haozuan, but Emperor Haozuan had acted against common sense and ordered them to be killed. This had happened 14 hours ago. From Liangzhu to the East Sea, and from the East Sea to Great Wu through various channels, it took only 14 hours. The efficiency of the spy system in the East Sea was truly amazing. Wu Qi couldn't help but shudder at the thought of the 3 emperors of the primordial god race. These 3 were the first generation of gods born after the great sage Pangu created the world. They were called god ancestors by the later generations. Their strength was infinitely close to the Tao integration realm, but because of the existence of their unique pure energy bodies, their bodies were their principal spirits, and their principal spirits were condensed into their bodies. Therefore, they were unable to fuse their principal spirits with the heavenly Tao and reach the true Tao integration realm. Gods were spirits manifested from the laws of the heavenly Tao. They were born directly from the heavenly Tao, and if they wanted to pursue the Tao integration realm, they would have to return to the heavenly Tao. It was like a drop of water returning to the ocean, and it would be immediately assimilated by the ocean. Therefore, although these 3 emperors had the strength infinitely close to the Tao integration realm, they did not have the characteristic of being immortal as long as the heavenly Tao existed. In theory, they could be killed by others. Emperor Haozuan had the right time, the right place, and the right people. The 3 emperors were stupid enough to provoke him, and the emperor closed the door and beat them. Judging from the power of Liangzhu's defensive formation that Wu Qi had seen, unless they were real existences of the Tao integration realm, they were in danger of dying. Even without Torch Dragon as a cushion, the power of the formation was enough to severely injure these 3 unlucky fools who had come looking for death. These 3 almighty experts had existed since the creation of heaven and earth. Just their infinite divine power alone was enough to make Wu Qi drool. Wu Qi did not lack the understanding of the heavenly Tao now. In his previous life, Yuan Ling's attainment was infinitely close to the Tao integration realm. What he lacked now was the cultivation base of magic power. If he could get even the slightest benefit from these 3, Wu Qi was confident that he could push his magic power to the limit of the Tao integration realm, and he could also greatly strengthen his foundation, laying a better foundation for breaking through the Tao integration realm in the future. After thinking for a long time, Wu Qi murmured to himself, "I hope they won't be beaten to death in the Great Hall. As long as you can rush out, hee hee." After calculating with his fingers for a while, Wu Qi hurriedly rose to his feet and shouted to the little eunuch beside him, "Go tell the Grand Imperial Advisor and the Second Imperial Advisor that I've had a sudden epiphany, and I'm looking for a secret place to study the heavenly Tao. I'll be gone for 2 or 3 days, or even 3 to 5 months. I'll leave all the government affairs to them." The little eunuch fell to his knees respectfully, kowtowed with his forehead on the floor, and said, "As you wish, Grandpa Tao Lord." Wu Qi nodded and crushed the jade slip, then took a step forward and flew up into the sky in a flash. He glanced down and saw that Great Wu's banners had been erected all over the valley. Countless newly recruited soldiers were learning the body-tempering technique of the human race under the guidance of officers, and some young men who were suitable for the cultivation of the Tao of oracles were learning the simplest incantation gestures. The vast valley was filled with a tense but orderly vitality. Great Wu was preparing to rush out of the valley and sweep across the world. Stockpiling provisions and armaments, recruiting soldiers and oracles, encouraging the people to work hard to reproduce and have children, mining mines to forge various metal ingots to fill the treasury, and developing farmlands to grow more crops. Countless things were going on. After giving a satisfied look at Great Wu, who had laid a certain foundation under his operation, Wu Qi transformed into a gale that was tens of feet long and shot into the sky with a shrill whistle. Then, he flew quickly into the belt of astral winds at a very high altitude, flapped his wings, and sped toward Yuxiong Plain. At the moment, Wu Qi's cultivation base was completely different from before. With his cultivation base skyrocketing, he could fly at an incredible speed, covering hundreds of millions of miles with just a single flap of his wings. Leaving a trail of blue light in his wake, he flew to the southern border of Yuxiong Plain, where his body expanded to tens of thousands of feet tall and hovered above a few military towns along the border. Unlike the shape-shifting magic of other immortals, Wu Qi had completely transformed into a gale at the genetic level, not just a change in appearance and aura. Now, he was a complete gale. No matter what magic was used, no one could see through his transformation, and magical treasures such as demon-revealing mirrors were completely ineffective against him. So, he flew slowly and ostentatiously in the sky. This was the gale's habit. It liked to hover in the middle of the astral winds, and when it was hungry, it would dive down to hunt for food. When it was not hungry, it could hover in the same place for hundreds of years. In any case, it had a very long life, and they had plenty of time to waste. Down below, Junjun felt a few weak divine senses sweep over him, and there were also dozens of spells that swept over his body with spiritual power fluctuations. The oracles in the military towns used various mystic arts, and they finally concluded that this was a pure-blooded gale. So, they ignored Wu Qi. In any case, the gale was an upper-grade divine beast, so they would not pick on Diyu for no reason, and generally, Diyu would not provoke the members of the Gale clan for no reason either. Hovering in the sky, Wu Qi used his primal Dharma eyes to look down at Yuxiong Plain. Under the vast land of Yuxiong, an endless stream of natural energy was surging madly, pouring into Liangzhu's defensive formation. With Liangzhu as the center, all the mountains and rivers within hundreds of millions of miles in radius were glowing brightly. All these mountains and rivers had become a part of the formation, providing Yuxiong Palace with endless power. In the east, north, and west of Liangzhu, a great number of supreme towers and countless soldiers hovered in the air, emanating a towering murderous aura that frightened even Wu Qi. After weighing the lethality of the three formations, he could not help but be struck speechless. Emperor Haozuan had spent a lot on them. If they were activated at all costs, they could even kill a Tao-breaking expert at the cost of all the people who deployed them and the collapse of the mountains hundreds of millions of miles around. All three directions were tightly blocked, leaving only the south as the only way out. By encircling the three emperors and leaving only one, they were forcing the three emperors to flee to the south if they managed to escape from Yuxiong Palace. By leaving such a way out, the three emperors would not have the idea of fighting to the death, and the losses in the pursuit would be reduced significantly. Moreover, their bases were not in the south. If they fled there, their subordinates would not be able to reinforce them in time, creating the best condition for Emperor Haozuan to hunt them down. As for the new Yu forces entrenched in the south, it all depended on whether the three emperors had colluded with them or not. For 10 whole days, Wu Qi was calculating the encirclement laid out by Emperor Haozuan. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise, and then a tricolored beam of light soared into the sky from the direction of Liangzhu. It hovered in the void, hesitated for a moment, then quickly turned into a beam of light that stretched tens of thousands of miles long and sped toward the south. As Wu Qi had expected, the three emperors did not choose to fight the formation in the other three directions. Instead, they fled toward the south, which seemed empty. With his keen eyes, he saw that the faces of Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor were as pale as a sheet of paper, and their bodies had become hazy and indistinct. Clearly, they had suffered a serious injury. Emperor Haozuan, who was hot on their heels, roared thunderously and slashed out golden sword beams at the three emperors with the Xianyuan sword in his hand. The distance between the four emperors was definitely no more than 10 miles. But, perhaps because they had seen the hope of escaping, the three emperors had no intention of fighting back. They just kept running forward, letting the sword beams hit them until their figures became more and more indistinct. Wu Qi nodded gladly. As ancient gods who had existed since the creation of heaven and earth, their cultivation bases were really terrifying. Even the layout of Yuxiong Palace could not trap them to death. It was really strange how they managed to break out of the palace. But, judging from the fact that only Emperor Haozuan was chasing after the three emperors, it was clear that even though De Yu had seriously injured the three emperors this time, he must have paid a heavy price. Wu Qi wondered how many ministers and experts De Yu had lost in Yuxiong Palace. Even as he was pondering, the tricolored beam of light had flown past under Wu Qi with a shrill whistle. The pale-faced Green Emperor, who was breathing out plumes of green smoke, even looked up at Wu Qi and scolded him as if he was a feathered animal or something. Emperor Haozuan, who was not injured at all, was chasing after the three emperors with a loud roar, as if he would not stop until he killed the three emperors with his sword. Slowly, Wu Qi twisted his body, transformed into a gust of breeze, and followed behind the four men from a long distance away. Chapter 926. As Wu Qi had expected, Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor were fleeing toward the south, and they had no intention of turning back and fighting Emperor Haozuan. Emperor Haozuan, on the other hand, was focused on hunting down the three emperors. The Xianyuan sword produced a great sheet of sword light that almost enveloped the three emperors, slashing them over and over again, causing them to shriek in pain. Every time the Xianyuan sword was waved, the mountains and rivers within 10,000 miles burst out with dazzling light at the same time. Shadows that were exactly the same as these mountains and rivers flashed across the Xianyuan sword. Every strike of the sword contained the power of mountains and rivers. The sword light was magnificent, and its power was astonishing. The tricolored light protecting Emperor Qing and the other two was cut into pieces, and when the sword light fell on their bodies, it left very deep sword marks. But, these three ancient divine emperors did not have fleshly bodies. Their bodies were made up of pure energy. When the Xianyuan sword cut open their bodies, the surrounding natural energy kept replenishing them, and the wounds healed at a rate visible to the naked eye. But, the sword beams were so fierce that each strike took away a wisp of their natal energy, making their bodies more and more blurry. All the way south from Liangzhu, all the military towns were surrounded by restrictive formations. To the three great emperors who were at their peak, the Forbidden Sky formation was a joke. But now, they were severely wounded by Emperor Haozuan, De Yu, and many other civil and military officials in Yuxiong Palace, and more than half of their natal energy essence was taken away. With their vitality severely wounded, they could not help but complain when they encountered these formations. When the tricolored light passed by a military town, it suddenly dropped to the ground and struggled to fly back into the sky. Emperor Haozuan had seized the rare opportunity to slash them dozens of times in a row. The Xianyuan sword steadily whittled away their energy bit by bit, making them shiver and feel extremely uncomfortable. But, they could not get rid of Emperor Haozuan's pursuit. When they finally rushed out of Yuxiong Plain, the three of them almost fell to the ground over a large city. Their bodies almost brushed past the top of the city wall, and White Emperor, who was flying the lowest, kicked the top of the wall and shattered a brick. Green Emperor came to his senses and snapped at Emperor Haozuan, "Human Emperor, do you really dare to kill us? Aren't you afraid that the three great god clans will fight to the death with you, do you?" Emperor Haozuan gritted his teeth and swung his sword down, destroying half of Green Emperor's foot. "What's the difference? I, am now in a precarious situation. I am surrounded by enemies on all sides. 3 old pigs and dogs have come to my door to declare war. I, will not rest until one of us is dead. What more is there to say?" Half of his foot was destroyed, and Qing Di howled in pain. He opened his mouth and inhaled. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged into his mouth, and the half of his foot that had been destroyed grew back. However, the sole of his foot was hazy, as if it was made of white mist. It no longer had the same texture as before. The lotus arch cried out in pain, today, if Emperor Haozuan flashed to Green Emperor's side, unleashed a ball of starlight from his left hand, and smashed it at the Emperor's ribs. Emperor Haozuan snapped, "Who do you think you are, emperors? If you want to die, just die. Die like a man. Don't make a fuss here like a girl." The starlight exploded and turned into dozens of chains that slithered into Green Emperor's body like venomous snakes. His body froze and he nearly fell to the ground. With an angry roar, the Azure Supreme Thearcha's body shook, and a large amount of green gas spewed out from his body, shattering the chains formed by the star power. He suddenly leaped forward, leaving the white Tharch and the black Tharch dozens of miles behind as he fled on his own. Emperor Haozuan burst into laughter and said, "Wonderful. You've even used your natal divine energy. How many years of your cultivation base have you lost just like that? 1 period, or 1 aeon? Hee, how much of your natal divine energy have you lost?" A god's natal divine energy was equivalent to an immortal's soul essence. It was their core and quintessential power. Using natal divine energy was like burning an immortal's immortal soul. Unless it was a matter of life and death, a god would never be willing to use it. This sudden burst of green chi not only allowed the Azure Tharch to fly several dozen kilometers forward, but also allowed the white Tharch and the black Tharch to fall far behind. It also allowed the Azure Thearcha's blurry and incomplete body to recover. Green Emperor kept his head down and kept rushing forward, turning a deaf ear to Black Emperor and White Emperor's curses. That old fool, Green Emperor, has begun to fight with his life. What do you think? Emperor Haozuan followed closely behind White Emperor and Black Emperor like a maggot, slowly sketching one strange rune after another in the void. The talisman glinted with starlight and exuded a bizarre aura. White Emperor and Black Emperor roared at the same time. Black and white lights flashed in their bodies, and they sped forward at the same time, passing Green Emperor and leaving him tens of miles behind. Wu Qi almost burst out laughing. It was just like the old joke, when you ran into a beast in the wild, you didn't need to run faster than the beast, you just needed to run faster than your companions. The high and mighty Thearchs of the god race, when their lives were at stake, did not show much of a moral character. Wu Qi did not understand why they could not join forces and fight Emperor Haozuan since they had already used their natal divine energy. Even if Emperor Haozuan's overall strength was unharmed, even if he had the Xianyuan sword in his hand, if these 3 emperors really put all their eggs in one basket, they would surely be able to defeat him and force him to flee. But, they would rather use their natal divine energy to flee than fight Emperor Haozuan. No wonder they were defeated. Hee, so this is what an ancient god is like. Wu Qi sneered in his mind. Flying at high speed in the sky, he retracted all his aura and transformed into a gust of wind, following closely behind the 3 emperors. "Natal divine energy," he said in a low voice, "I'd like to see where you can run to. Cough up more blood." Emperor Haozuan caught up to Green Emperor unhurriedly, thrust his sword into the emperor's back, and snapped, "Green Emperor, didn't you want me, to give you an explanation? This is Yu's explanation. It was you who colluded with the Celestial Court to plot against me, Yu. What explanation do you want from us? What explanation do you want from us? Is this fucking explanation enough?" Emperor Haozuan, who was usually dignified, cursed all Green Emperor's relatives with filthy words as he thrust the Xianyuan sword into the emperor's back again and again. Green Emperor howled in pain, and his face was filled with fear. He was frightened by Emperor Haozuan, who cursed like a madman. How could existences of their statuses and levels dare to hurl insults like Emperor Haozuan? It could only be said that Emperor Haozuan had gone mad, completely mad. Otherwise, how could a human emperor utter so many foul words? With a long cry, Green Emperor suddenly waved a green wooden staff and slammed it hard against the Xianyuan sword. The wooden staff was originally overflowing with cyan light, and its color was like jade. Obviously, it was an extremely rare treasure. However, at this moment, the wooden staff was covered with cracks of various sizes. After being hit by the Xianyuan sword, the wooden staff let out a mournful cry, and a crack suddenly expanded, almost splitting the wooden staff into two pieces. Wu Qi's eyes lit up. This is a good item. Is this the natal divine artifact that was born when Green Emperor was created? Green Emperor was born with the wood energy of the East, and the staff contained an extremely pure and powerful wood energy. If Wu Qi could devour and absorb the staff with the heaven-refining grand magic and the scroll of stealing, he would almost be able to cultivate himself into an indestructible body. What a pity! Why was such a spirit treasure reduced to such a miserable state? Clearly, the three emperors had paid a price to escape from Yuxiong Palace. Perhaps they had unleashed the full power of their natal divine artifacts, and only then did they barely manage to break through the formation in Liangzhu. As the staff struck him, Green Emperor coughed out several mouthfuls of green liquid. Then, with a flash of green smoke, he flew past White Emperor and Black Emperor. Emperor Haozuan was knocked flying dozens of miles away by the staff. Then, he drew an arc in the air and suddenly came next to White Emperor and Black Emperor. He raised the sword and slashed it down again. 3 seniors, 3 divine emperors, 3 old dogs, don't run in different directions. If you run together, you might have a chance to catch your breath. But if you run separately, one of you might die. Hee, don't split up. White Emperor and Black Emperor roared. 2 beams of black and white light flashed as they passed Green Emperor at lightning speed and continued to flee. As Emperor Haozuan had said, the 3 of them had been running together, and none of them had the idea to split up. If they joined forces, they might have a chance to escape. But if they split up, one of them would surely fall into Emperor Haozuan's hands. None of them dared to bet on a 1 in 3 chance of dying. They valued their lives too much, and they dared not bet on who would be the unlucky one who would fall in the end. Emperor Haozuan caught up with Green Emperor and slashed his sword heavily on the Emperor's shoulder. What a pity that the 3 of you detonated your natal divine artifacts in order to escape from Yuxiong Palace, he said coolly. Had it not been for that, you would have been killed by my sword long ago, and you wouldn't have to work so hard. Green Emperor howled miserably as one of his arms was cut off by the sword. Shaking his head and roaring furiously, he transformed into a plume of green smoke and shot forward, leaving White Emperor and Black Emperor behind in the blink of an eye. The chase continued at an incredible speed. Suddenly, dozens of huge flags on the clouds ahead unfurled in the wind, and the dazzling words "New You" could be seen clearly. 360 supreme towers formed an incomparably strange, twisted rune in the air. Just as the 3 fleeing great emperors cried out in joy, a large gust of chilly wind and dark smoke suddenly burst out from those supreme towers, condensing into an enormous ghost head and darting out. The 3 emperors howled miserably as they were knocked hundreds of miles away by the ghost head, hitting Emperor Haozuan's sword and cutting them a few more times. Emperor of New Yu, have you forgotten our covenant? Black Emperor screamed. Emperor Haozuan flew into a rage and growled, "You bastards! You are really in cahoots with each other." King Xian Shan, who was dressed in an emperor's robe, appeared on a supreme tower with a smile on his face. He cupped his fists at them and sighed apologetically, "Emperors, this path is blocked. You can escape in any other direction. I hope you'll be able to get out of here alive." Emperor Haozuan glared at King Xian Shan, gritted his teeth and said with a cold snort, "Unfilial son. Squinting at Emperor Haozuan, King Xian Shan bowed deeply and said in a flat voice, "Father, De Yu is doomed. There is no need to struggle anymore." Green Emperor, Black Emperor, and White Emperor cursed King Xian Shan for his treachery. At the same time, they all chose to fly up into the sky and flee toward the outer heavenly realm. Emperor Haozuan glanced at King Xian Shan, then followed the three emperors without saying a word. Chapter 927. The pursuit had broken through thousands of dangerous zones outside Panga continent, and just as they were about to reach the starry sky, a cauldron-shaped jade pendant hanging on Emperor Haozuan's waist suddenly let out a shrill cry, and a glaring red thread appeared out of nowhere on its surface. Emperor Haozuan shuddered. He glanced at the three emperors fleeing in front of him, then spun and flew toward Liangzhu as fast as he could. The Xianyuan sword transformed into a golden torrent and sped toward Liangzhu with Emperor Haozuan wrapped around it. Judging from the way he was flying, it was as if he had been frightened out of his wits. He did not look like the mighty human emperor who had been chasing after the three emperors just a moment ago. Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor were struck dumb. They stood at the edge of the last dark Xianbing on the outskirts of Panga continent, watching in confusion as Emperor Haozuan fled in panic. What the hell was going on? The three of them had been chased by Emperor Haozuan all the way, and they were about to turn back and fight him with all their might. Why did he suddenly run away? Shaking his head, Green Emperor took out his natal divine artifact and waved it at the void. Rich natural energy rolled over from all directions, turning into green torrents and pouring into the three emperors' bodies. The haggard Black Emperor and White Emperor panted heavily, then nodded to Green Emperor to thank him. Emperor Haozuan fled so fast that in the blink of an eye, he could only see a golden dot flashing across the sky. White Emperor was puzzled. What's going on? Not only did our secret ally not come to our rescue, but he also gave us a head-on blow. Why did the people who were chasing us give up when they saw that we had succeeded? Green Emperor's eyes flickered. Suddenly, he exchanged a glance with Black Emperor, and both of them shuddered at the same time. The Emperor of New Yu is the puppet of the Celestial Court, Black Emperor said nervously in a low voice. How dare he betray us without the Celestial Court's permission? White Emperor realized what was going on at once. His eyes went wide as he said angrily, "That Ziwei, he is trying to set us up." Green Emperor cried out, "This place is dangerous. We need to go now. If Ziwei and the others attack, our lives will be in danger. You and I both have princes who are on good terms with the people from the Celestial Court. If you and I die here, the three celestial clans will belong to the Celestial Court." The three's expressions changed drastically. Just as they were about to flee, the void suddenly became stagnant, and their surroundings became dusky. All of the spiritual chi had disappeared without a trace, leaving only an evil, sticky, glue-like aura with a cold, bone-chilling stench filling the air. The bodies of Qing the Arch and the other two stiffened. They felt their bodies go limp, and the spirit chi around them disappeared completely. Not only could they not absorb spirit chi to heal their injuries, but the evil aura in the outside world was also sucking away their spirit chi. White Emperor slowly pulled out a heavy sword that was as tall as him. Like Green Emperor's wooden staff, his sword, glinting faintly with a silver gleam, was also covered in cracks. Clearly, this natal divine artifact of his had also been severely damaged when he charged out of Yuxiong Palace. He coughed out a mouthful of sticky white aura and fused it into the sword. The tip of the sword flashed with a silver gleam, and the thickest cracks on it began to heal slowly. "May I ask who are you, and why are you blocking our way?" White Emperor cried out softly. The dusky aura grew thicker and thicker, sending a chill straight into their bodies. The strange stench grew stronger and stronger. Green Emperor and the others could not help but twitch their noses and subconsciously shut off their sense of smell. For gods like them, the sense of smell was not important. They mostly relied on their vast divine sense to observe the outside world. A hoarse voice came from nowhere. The voice chuckled for a while, then said slowly, "I'm not an expert, but I do know an old ghost. Hee, why are you pulling out your sword? Do you want to kill me? Do you want to kill me?" If you want to kill me, you'll have to find me first. The hoarse voice was filled with mockery. White Emperor's eyes flickered as he carefully held his sword horizontally in front of his chest. Green Emperor had also pulled out his wooden staff and held it in front of him. Together with Black Emperor, who had pulled out a short black staff and was holding his breath, the three of them stood back to back in a circular formation that emphasized defense over offense. Hiding not far away, Wu Qi carefully glanced around. The aura was very strange, and he could not find much benefit from it even though he was the first thread of innate thievery energy. The gray aura was filled with all kinds of negative and ominous energy. Wu Qi carefully extracted a wisp of it and fused it into his body, but in the end, he only managed to refine more than 99% of it, leaving only a tiny wisp of gray light that fused into Wu Qi's body. But with this wisp of gray light, the pungent odor and cold aura could no longer invade Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi carefully analyzed the origin of the gray aura. It did not seem to be the spirit energy of this world. It was only because Wu Qi was strong enough that the thievery energy was stronger than this gray aura. If it was someone else here, the gray aura would have already invaded their body and frozen their yuanshen and body. Just as Wu Qi was carefully examining the surroundings, White Emperor suddenly let out a loud cry. A pair of gleaming silver wings flew out of his back, propelling him into a tiny beam of silver light that flashed across the void. Even with Wu Qi's primordial Dharma eyes, he could barely see White Emperor's afterimage. White Emperor swung his heavy sword in the air, and a very strange puff sound was heard. A large amount of black sticky liquid with a pungent odor splashed onto White Emperor's right hand. White Emperor quickly retreated to the side of Green Emperor and Black Emperor. Then, as if nothing had happened, he switched his natal divine artifact to his other hand, swung it, and cut off his right arm from the shoulder. Black smoke rose from his right arm and fell to the ground. In just a few seconds, his arm had turned into a ball of sticky, stinking liquid, wriggling in the air like a living thing. "Be careful," White Emperor said in a low voice, "there is a poison in that guy's body, one that can even infect the bodies of gods like us." Green Emperor raised his eyebrows and sneered, "Even the secret palace of Deyu does not have such a poison that works so quickly on the bodies of ancient gods like us. Are you still not going to show yourself? Are you Wu Xian, or a member of Wu Peng's clan?" The hoarse voice laughed and murmured, "I'm not a member of Wu Xian's clan, nor am I a member of Wu Peng's clan. I'm Wu Xian." A mass of gray smoke spread from the spot where White Emperor had swung his sword. A wriggling strange thing, about 100 miles in circumference and a dozen miles in height, with a body that looked like cancer cells, covered with countless twisted, moaning faces, and covered with black, red, and green spots, slowly emerged from the gray smoke. An indescribable evil aura swept over them, and the shrill cries of countless wronged souls seemed to ring out directly from the depths of their souls. Not to mention Green Emperor and the other two who bore the brunt of it, even Wu Qi, who was hiding in a corner, felt the pores all over his body shrink. He was so disgusted that he almost vomited. Wu Xian," Green Emperor said in a panic, How did you become like this?" Wu Xian laughed in a strange voice. "Long time no see, Your Majesty," he said in a low voice, "it's been a long time since we last met. Well, when I was still a young man, I almost became the son-in-law of Green Emperor's clan. If Qinghua had not died suddenly, I would have to call you patriarch now." Laughing, Wu Xian wriggled his body and slowly approached Green Emperor and the other two. "But," he murmured in a low voice, "I look pretty good now, don't I? Look, what a perfect body I have, an immortal body. Hee, White Emperor, how did it feel to cut me just now?" White Emperor shook his head. His right arm slowly grew out, but it was much dimmer than the previous one. Wu Xian sighed and snorted, "What a pity that I was a little too late. I wanted to trap the human emperor as well, but he had the warning talisman given by the Huang clan, which saved him from the disaster. Saint Empress Wa's divine power is indeed great. I'm no match for her now, but it's enough to deal with you three old dogs. Wu Xian, how dare you attack the three of us?" Black Emperor said in a cold voice. Wu Xian laughed strangely. His body wriggled, and a mass of about a mile in circumference slowly bulged, roughly turning into a human figure standing in front of the three. Wu Xian said in a strange voice, "Why wouldn't I dare?" Wu Xian said in a strange voice. "It was the great celestial emperor who asked me to kill you, so he will bear all the consequences." "What does it have to do with me?" He laughed strangely, then suddenly said, "In fact, the great celestial emperor asked me to kill you with a curse." The faces of Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor flickered with fright. Their bodies swayed, and their natal divine energy burst out of their bodies, transforming into 3 sets of loose robes that were formed by glowing runes on the surface of their bodies. "Wu Xian, don't think that only you, the forbidden clans, know curses. All the curses of the human race come from the inheritance of the ancient gods, so our curses are not inferior to yours." Green Emperor snapped. Wu Xian sighed, shook his head, and said with a sinister smile, "But I can't bear to part with those good materials. The great celestial emperor has given me enough materials to kill the 3 of you with a curse. But, on second thought, you have all been severely wounded by Yu Xiong Palace's formation and have lost so much of your energy. Isn't it too wasteful for me to kill you with a curse?" Wu Xian took a deep breath and said with a smile, "So, I've left those materials for the children to refine all kinds of curse artifacts. As for the 3 of you, I'll kill you myself. Hee, I'm very interested in your natal divine energy. If I can devour the 3 of you, my cultivation base should have reached the realm of Dao fusing, right?" Wu Qi narrowed his eyes at Wu Xian, who was a monster. It seemed that Wu Xian was also thinking of killing these 3 emperors. In that case, Wu Qi was his competitor. These 3 pieces of fat meat were the treasures that Wu Qi had his eyes on. How could he let them fall into Wu Xian's hands? In the other room, Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor sneered at the same time. Black Emperor even mocked, "Wu Xian, you are a traitor of the human race, and yet you dare to say you can devour the 3 of us?" Wu Xian wriggled his body slowly and said slowly, "By the way, don't you feel anything strange? Have you forgotten that apart from curses, we, the Wu Xian clan, are best at using poison?" The faces of Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor fell, turning 100 times uglier than when they saw their own mothers cheating on their husbands. Chapter 928. The Forbidden Clan, Wuxian Clan. When they were still an important part of the alliance of human clans and existed as spiritual mentors of the human race, they were most famous not for their spells, but for their skills in medicine. All kinds of spirit medicines could save lives, heal wounds, regrow limbs, detoxify and exorcise evil spirits, and kill countless enemies with a handful of medicines. There were medicines that saved people and medicines that harmed people. Among them, the most famous was the Wuxian clan's voodoo poison. It was traceless, soundless, colorless, and traceless. By the time you realized its existence, you were already a dead or half-dead man, and everything was decided by the will of the person who took it. Emperor Qing, Emperor Black, and Emperor White stared at Wu Xian in horror. Their bodies were trembling, and the gray color gradually spread upward from the tips of their toes. The ominous gray color gradually spread up their bodies, to the soles of their feet, ankles, calves, knees, thighs. Their bodies constantly flashed with the unique light of their natal divine energy, but no matter how hard they tried, they were unable to stop the deathly gray aura from spreading from their bodies due to their severe injuries. When the gray color reached their waists, Emperor Qing gritted his teeth and pulled out a fist-sized medicine bottle made of cyan wood from under his sleeve. Then, he solemnly poured out 3 ring-sized pills that shone with a dazzling green light. Wu Xian twisted his body mockingly and murmured, "Fusang twig, hot spring water, 9 days of training, immortal divine medicine. Good, very good. Good, very good. Which is more powerful, my Wu Xian's witch poison or your Qing Emperor's immortal divine medicine?" "Ha, very good. Take them now." Emperor Qing carefully gave the 2 tiny pills to Emperor Black and Emperor White, who swallowed them at the same time. Immediately, a large sheet of green light emerged from their chests and abdomens, while a green mist rushed out of the top of their heads and turned into a dense, tree-shaped mist. On each of the 9 lonely branches was a huge, golden, three-legged crow. Along with their caws, these crows spurted out large streams of golden spell symbols, which transformed into torrents and merged into the bodies of Emperor Qing and the other two emperors. Amidst a crackling noise, the gray color on their waists and abdomens gradually receded, and their blurred bodies gradually became solid and solid. The divine herbs of immortality were rubbing and colliding with the poison of Wu Xian, and at the same time, they were quickly replenishing the energy they had lost while being hunted by Emperor Haozuan. A vast wave of divine power swept out in all directions, pushing the gray aura away, revealing a small patch of normal starry sky around the emperors. Three-colored light swirled as the cracks on their natal divine artifacts healed rapidly. The immortal divine medicine had provided them with tremendous power, which they had turned into energy essence and injected into their artifacts to heal themselves. The figure that Wu Xian had manifested applauded and kept nodding with a smile. What a wonderful divine herb of immortality. That's it. That's it. I'll restore you to your best condition so that I can devour you all. You must be in your best condition, so that the fruit will taste the most delicious. Wu Xian's voice was deep and hoarse, but it echoed for a long time. Wu Qi, hiding in a corner, felt a little uncomfortable and picked his ears. Now that the situation was treacherous, Wu Qi dared not to act rashly. Wu Xian had actually allowed the three emperors to consume the immortal divine medicine. Was he not looking for trouble for himself? The gray aura had been expelled to the three emperors' knees, and the divine power emanating from them was growing stronger and stronger, gradually exceeding the limit that Wu Qi could sense. It was clear that they were rapidly recovering all their divine power. Did this monster really have the confidence to devour three emperors in their best condition? Even someone as mighty as Du had to rely on Yuxiong Palace's formation and the advantage of numbers to trap the three emperors who had come to him, and only then could he barely injure them. Did Wu Xian think that he alone could match the power of the whole Yangzhou? Just as Wu Qi was cursing Wu Xian in his mind, he suddenly let out a strange, triumphant laugh. The Azure Supreme the Arch and the other two had already forced the layer of gray to their ankles. It looked like they were about to completely expel the gray qi. Just then, Wu Xian suddenly let out a strange, complacent laugh. While the three of them were startled, Wu Qi saw their faces suddenly turn gray, and the ominous gray was spreading from top to bottom at a speed 10 times faster than the gray that had spread from their toes. The bodies of the three god emperors trembled violently. They repeatedly urged their life origin divine energies, but their divine powers seemed to have fused with the gray space. They seemed to have become one with the gray space outside. Although their life origin divine energies were strong, they couldn't disperse their bodies. They roared in horror and kept incanting spells to dispel the terrible gray aura. Wu Xian sighed lazily and said, "It seems that the immortal divine medicine is nothing more than this." Laughing for a while, Wu Xian shook his head and murmured to himself, "Back then, when our Wu Xian family was still the great priest of the humankind, the leader of the human clan only allowed us to focus on developing all kinds of life-saving medicines, and forbade us to touch too many of those evil medicines. But after we left the human race, the successive great celestial emperors of the celestial court were all kind. They could develop whatever we wanted, and they always provided us with enough materials. It's been so many years, Emperor Qing, I'm afraid you haven't even changed the prescription of the immortal divine medicine, have you? However, our Wuxian clan's witchcraft poison formula basically changes every 10,000 years. The toxicity becomes stronger, and the power becomes more and more mysterious. Even the witchcraft poisons we concoct have cultivated themselves into spirits. You're still using the old way to detoxify yourself, but how can it work?" Waving his hands around, Wu Xian murmured in a low voice, "The gray world you see is transformed from a Wu poison with a strong cultivation base. This is an interstitial world made of Wu poison, and everything here is poisonous. You have been here for so long, and your bodies have been infected by the poisonous gas. It has merged with you, and you can no longer separate yourselves." Cold sweat trickled down Wu Qi's back as he listened. In his previous life, Yuan Ling was known as the best in alchemy among chaos fiend gods, but he was not as incredible as Wu Xian. Even though divine pills had spirits, they could not cultivate themselves into demons, could they? In particular, the idea that a pill that cultivated itself into a demon could condense an interstitial world, in which everything was poisonous, was too groundbreaking. Perhaps my alchemy should also develop in this direction. After all, it had been a long time since Yuan Ling's death. During this period of time, the Wu Xian clan had been studying various prescriptions and poison techniques. Their research on pills and poisons was obviously much more extensive and complicated than Yuan Ling's. He glanced at Wu Xian with a hint of greed in his eyes. He made up his mind that if he had the chance, he would touch this old monster's body and see if he could get his hands on the medicine books of Wu Xian's clan. If he did that, he would make a fortune. The Wu Xian clan's poisons were also very useful in the East Sea. For example, they could refine the drunken dragon incense into a world of its own, just like the Wu poison. Anyone who came in would immediately be drunk. Together with Wu Qi's knowledge of arrays, it was a heaven-defying combination that could kill someone without paying for it. At the thought of this, Wu Qi almost drooled. He licked his lips and began to carefully circulate the primordial violet qi throughout his body. Wu Xian should be ready to strike, right? When he was about to devour the three emperors, it would be the best time for Wu Qi to strike. Judging by Wu Xian's disgusting appearance, he must have cultivated an evil cultivation method, so the Buddhist divine power should be very lethal to him. Wu Qi was ready to transform into the Amitabha golden body. The three emperors had almost all turned into gray statues. Only a small area between their eyebrows, where the core of their divine souls was, barely maintained the color of their skin and flesh. If this area was also attacked by the gray, they would be completely assimilated by the Wu poison, and Wu Xian would be able to easily devour them. With the powerful cultivation bases of the three emperors, which had been preserved since the world was created, Wu Xian might really have a chance to step into the Tao fusing realm with a single step with his powerful divine power. In the Tao fusing realm, unless the Pangu world collapsed and the laws of the heavenly Tao were completely destroyed, no one could hurt a Tao fusing expert. Even if 100 Tao fusing experts ganged up on one person, they could at most suppress him, severely injure him, or even force him to be reincarnated, but they could never destroy him. Wu Qi was also secretly calculating. If he could refine the three emperors, even if he could not directly break through to the Tao fusing realm, he would at least be infinitely close to it, right? With that cultivation base, the almighty experts in this world must be careful. Don't give Wu Qi a chance, or they will definitely cry. Whether it's Buddha or Daozu, all of you will cry. When Wu Xian saw the three emperors convulsing, he could not help but let out a strange laugh. He said softly, "Don't struggle, it's useless. You three, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You came from the heavenly Tao, and today, you can return to the heavenly Tao. What a happy thing it is. Why do you have to make it so sad? Be happy and fuse with me. What a happy thing it is." As soon as his voice faded, a terrible tearing sound was heard. An extremely thin golden light slashed down from the sky, tearing the gray world apart. The golden light contained an extremely terrifying power of fire, which was hotter, more domineering, and more unreasonable than the nirvana flame Wu Qi had collected in the chaotic world. The gray world suddenly burst into flames like a spark falling into a barrel of oil. In just a few seconds, the voodoo world Wu Xian had set up was completely burned away. Wu Qi's divine sense quickly made contact with the golden light, and the result he obtained shocked him. The power of fire in the golden light was a fire elemental divine power that was formed by combining dozens of vicious flames of the same level as the nirvana flame into one. It was refined with one's own blood essence and divine soul. In his previous life, Yuan Ling had once refined the Yuan Ling true flame as the foundation for alchemy and artifact crafting, but in this life, Wu Qi did not have the time to collect these domineering flames. Although he knew it was a cultivation technique that could refine one's natal fire elemental divine power, he did not have the time to practice it. In his previous life, Yuan Ling had spent 3,600 eons to collect the materials, and then spent another 3 eons to finally refine the Yuan Ling true flame. How many years had Wu Qi lived in this life? Cautiously, Wu Qi raised his head and looked up. A mass of golden light was hovering right above them, emanating a terrible, suffocating heat. Wu Xian, the antidote. A majestic voice rang out. Wu Xian's body stiffened completely. After a full 10 minutes, he carefully fished out 3 black pills and threw them out. With a flash of golden light, the 3 emperors, as well as the golden light, disappeared without a trace. The majestic voice echoed in the air, "They can't die. That's not in our interest." Wu Xian opened his mouth to curse, but he quickly shut it and flew away from the 33 heavens with his tail between his legs. Chapter 929. Looking at Wu Xian flying away from the 33 heavens, Wu Qi took a few hesitant steps to catch up with him. The prescription of Wu Xian's clan was very tempting. However, Wu Xian's cultivation base was terrifying, and his strange appearance was even more unbearable. It was not easy to get anything from him. Wu Qi sighed softly and beckoned at the void. Immediately, dozens of stars in the sky suddenly burst into dazzling silver light. With a secret spell, Wu Qi triggered the natal star power of these stars, which turned into the 4 phases demon-suppressing lock and fell on Wu Xian's head. A shackle condensed from a square beam of starlight fell on Wu Xian out of thin air. His body, which was 100 miles in circumference, stiffened, and countless silver thunderbolts darted across him with ear-piercing booms. "I'll make you sick if I don't kill you." With an evil thought in mind, Wu Qi turned into a breeze and drifted away, following the subtle aura left behind by the golden light as he chased into the distance. Wu Xian was thrown into a panic by the sudden attack. He roared hoarsely and spewed out a thick gray mist to resist the bombardment of the silver thunderbolts. A tremendous force twisted his body and imprisoned his magic power. Flustered, he could only barely cope with it with the divine ability that came with his mutated and powerful body. What Wu Qi had attracted was the natal star power of the 28 constellation lords of the 4 directions, which was the purest evil-warding starlight. The divine ability Wu Xian cultivated could no longer be regarded as an evil art, and even the evilest divine ability in the world was not as evil as his. Therefore, when the starlight fell on him, it was like water poured on fire, causing the most direct and fundamental damage to him. A plume of mist poured out of his body as he howled hoarsely and cursed the person who had secretly attacked him with the most vicious curse. But Wu Qi was already far away, and his aura had long turned into chaos. Unless Wu Xian could see Wu Qi, cursing him out of thin air would not be able to hurt him at all. Amidst the chaos, a purple-gold jade tablet shot out of Wu Xian's body. 33 clouds were carved on the jade tablet, and on the topmost cloud stood a small palace. This was a token that only the core high-ranking officials of the Celestial Court had. The location of the palace directly marked the holder's position in the core circle of power of the Celestial Court. All of a sudden, the heavenly star force retracted, and dozens of celestial lords appeared awkwardly. They looked at Wu Xian's strange appearance with surprise and bewilderment, then cupped their fists and bowed to him. Wu Xian snorted angrily. He could not be bothered with these celestial lords, so he cursed the people who had plotted against him behind his back and wriggled all the way to outer space. Following the faint aura left behind by the golden light in the void, Wu Qi crossed the edge of Panga continent, flew down along the trillions of miles thick border, and finally came to the back of the continent. On the back of Panga continent, in a world of lava, roughly opposite to Xianyuan Peak, the Yellow Emperor's Taoist Right Temple, Wu Qi saw the golden light hovering over a crimson tree from a distance. This place was different from the front of Panga continent. Although there were stars, suns, and moons, the environment here was extremely harsh. Except for a few divine trees with extremely tenacious vitality, no other plants could survive here. Only extremely strong animals, whose cultivation bases were at least at the level of peak-level gold immortals, were qualified to live here. All living beings below that level would be turned into ashes in less than 2 breaths of time. When the sun came out, it was a sea of fire and lava, and when the moon came out, it was a land of ice and snow. Be it hot or cold, blade-like gusts of wind blew across everything, and the power of the wind blades was comparable to the attack of an upper-grade gold immortal artifact. When the gusts collided with each other, thunderbolts shot out in all directions, and each blow was as powerful as the full-force blow of an upper-grade gold immortal. If an ordinary person touched it, they would be smashed to pieces. It was a very short and harsh hell, but it was such a place that nurtured countless magical creatures that could not be found on the front of Pangu continent. For example, the crimson tree where the golden light stopped had a radius of tens of thousands of miles, and was millions of miles tall. This crimson tree only had 24 branches, and each branch had only 9 branches. Apart from that, it didn't even have a single leaf. The tree trunk was as smooth as a mirror, wrapped in a tens of meters thick layer of flame that looked like melted glass. A terrifyingly high temperature enveloped the land within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles, burning this place into an ocean of lava. It was a divine tree that was about to evolve into an interstitial world, and once it succeeded, it would have the cultivation base of a primordial expert. Judging by its current climate, it was just a tree without sentience, but its power had been accumulated to the limit. Once the quantitative change triggered a qualitative change, it would immediately develop sentience, take on a human form, and possess the divine abilities of the great Tao. With its mighty body, if it took on a human form, its overall strength might even reach the peak of the realm of Tao reasoning. Wu Qi could not help but blink his eyes at the fearsome divine tree. If he uprooted it before it developed sentience, with Wu Qi's means, he could at least craft it into a supreme-grade chaos spirit artifact, or perhaps a supreme artifact of primal grade. At least, none of the 6 supreme-grade chaos spirit artifacts Wu Qi had crafted in his previous life were as good as the divine tree in front of him. It was a pity that this divine tree had an owner. Someone was deliberately protecting it, laying down a layer of restrictive spells around it. It was like a city wall that firmly protected the divine tree. At the same time, it also limited the range of the divine tree's fire. Otherwise, with the power of the fire on the surface of the tree, the area of the lava sea around it could be increased by tens of thousands of times. Carefully slipping to the side of the restrictive spell, Wu Qi sent out a wisp of his divine sense and carefully traced it. What he saw shocked him. The restrictive spell was very simple, even the simplest of the 5 elements restrictive spells. Anyone who touched it would be burned by the fire, and there was nothing special about it. However, the cultivation base of the person who laid it was simply terrifying. There were 360,000 invisible restrictive runes around the tree, each of which contained the power equivalent to the cultivation base of Wu Qi, a 6th-grade Tao-breaking expert. On top of that, these runes were constantly emitting a domineering divine sense that said, "Get out of here if you don't want to die." The 6 simple words kept spreading out in all directions with the divine sense, covering almost 1/10 of the area on the back of Pangu continent. Such a domineering style, it's a bit like. Muttering to himself, Wu Qi's body transformed into a gust of wind, passed through the restrictive spell, and approached the tree cautiously. Such a terrible power and such domineering words were very much in line with someone Yuan Ling had known in his previous life. That man was also known for being rude and violent among the Chaos Fiend gods. Could it be that he was still alive after so many years? The outer restrictive spell was also in line with his style. This fellow hated exquisite control of magic power and all kinds of fantastic ideas. He was like the most primitive beast, accustomed to crushing his enemies with the most direct and domineering pure force. He was always straightforward and never varied. The outer restrictive spell was indeed his work. It was not that he did not want to lay out more advanced restrictive spells, but Wu Qi suspected that he had not made any progress for so many years. Perhaps, this was the simplest restrictive spell he knew. Great horns, is this guy? Among the Chaos Fiend gods, he was a famous fool whose brain was replaced by lava. In his previous life, Yuan Ling and Great Horns were friends, and the old man even owed Yuan Ling a favor. Once, he had a conflict with a few Chaos Fiend gods. He fought 10 Chaos Fiend gods alone, and in the end, he was beaten up and barely escaped with his life. When he was on the verge of death, it was Yuan Ling who saved him with spirit herbs. But, Yuan Ling, who was just as stubborn as Great Horns, took advantage of the fact that he could not move and removed most of his scales, chopped off one of his horns, and brought it back to refine an artifact. Smacking his lips, Wu Qi found it a little troublesome. Did Great Horns owe me a favor or not? After so many years, when all the other Chaos Fiend gods had fallen, if Great Horns were still alive, he should have stepped into the Tao fusing realm by now, right? If that was the case, it would be a blessing in disguise. How could the wise and wise old man Yuan Ling, who had fallen and reincarnated, have reached the Tao fusing realm? Carefully, he approached the tree, and when he was about tens of miles away from it, he dived into the magma. Although the escape art in the scroll of stealing was extremely mysterious, and now that he had comprehended the primal purple energy, it had made his escape art invisible and traceless, he was probably facing a supreme existence of the Tao fusing realm. But, in front of him was probably a supreme existence of the Tao fusing realm. How could Wu Qi dare to be careless? On the tree, the ball of golden light had revealed its true form. It was a monster with a body as strong as a lion, a pair of golden wings on its back, and a head that looked like a dignified middle-aged man. He had a lion's face and a lion's body, a pair of wings on his back, a shield in his left hand and a sword in his right, and a ring of golden flame wreathed around his body. It should be the natal divine ability he had cultivated, a flame refined from dozens of divine flames of the Nirvana flame grade. Under the tree, on a flat ground surrounded by two thin roots, a handsome man, who was about 30 meters tall and wearing a red robe, was sitting straight on a large chair that was condensed from lava, which was still constantly flowing. At first glance, the man looked very handsome, but if one looked closely, one would find that the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows looked like they were carved from granite by a third-rate stonemason. Although he looked handsome, they were coarse, as if he had not paid any attention to his appearance when he transformed into a human form. Two large red, spiral-shaped horns grew out of the top of the man's head. The horns had a great arc and formed a circle several feet in diameter over the man's head, making them look very mighty. Raging flames were wrapping around the two sharp, nearly 10 feet tall horns and burning fiercely. From time to time, deep, muffled whistles of wind and fire could be heard coming out of the horns. But, to Wu Qi's surprise, one of the horns was 3 inches longer than the other, and its texture was much denser than the other. Even its color was a little redder. It was like a deer that had one of its horns cut off, and the new one always looked a little immature. Wu Qi rolled his eyes. That's right, Great Horns, an old acquaintance of mine from my previous life, the unlucky fellow who was nearly torn apart by Yuan Ling and used to refine artifacts. Wu Qi was a little hesitant. Did he owe Great Horns a life-saving debt, or did he owe him a grudge for destroying his body? Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Red Emperor were standing in front of Great Horns, with wisps of gray smoke seeping out of their bodies. When the gray smoke had completely disappeared from their bodies, Great Horns finally spoke. Chapter 930. Great Horns' voice was as dry as the memory of his previous life. It sounded like two masses of sand rubbing against each other, without the slightest change of emotion or the slightest rise and fall. When his voice reached their ears, it was as if a mass of dry sand had been shoved into their throats, making them feel suffocated. You can't die. These were the first words he said. Go back and teach your sons a lesson. These were his second words. You can go now. With these words, Great Horns sent away the 3 emperors of the god race. His words were clean and concise, without any superfluous wording. Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor rolled their eyes. They stared blankly at Great Horns for a long while before Green Emperor said with a wry smile, "Thank you for saving our lives, Senior. But we're seriously injured, and if we leave now," Great Horns gave Green Emperor a stiff look with his eyes and said dryly, "Take medicine when you're seriously injured. You can concoct immortal divine pills yourself, so why don't you take them?" Green Emperor's claws twitched when he heard that. Immortal divine pills were indeed top-notch life-saving and healing medicines, and could heal any injury no matter how serious it was. However, the immortal divine medicine was extremely difficult to refine. The Azure Supreme the Arch had spent countless years to gather the ingredients for 9 cauldrons of medicinal pills. Of those, 2 cauldrons had failed, and only 7 had succeeded, totaling 63 immortal divine medicines. He had used some of them to give favors to some of his important subordinates over the years when they were accidentally injured, and he had used them to exchange for some rare treasures with outsiders. Now, he only had a few life-saving pills left, and he had just taken 3 of them, which made his heart bleed with pain. Now that they were in a safe place, how could he bear to use 3 more of them when he could heal his injuries with just a little time? A deep cough came from the top of the tree as the lion said in a low voice, "Master, His Majesty Green Emperor wants us to use this place to heal their injuries, and they will go back when their injuries are almost healed." Well, immortal divine pills are extremely precious, and it would be a waste to use a few more for no reason. Great Horns was stunned for a long time. Then, his stiff lips curved upward as he said dryly, "Is that so? Then, heal yourselves." With his eyes closed, Great Horns was wrapped in a thick layer of lava, and then he fell asleep comfortably, leaving the 3 emperors to one side. The Sphinx gave a wry smile. He shook his head and said, "Master is always like this. I didn't mean to offend your majesties. Your majesties, please do as you please. You may return once your injuries have healed." This time, the celestial court has schemed against the 3 majesties, which is very disadvantageous to us. The 3 celestial clans cannot become the vassals of the celestial court. This is our bottom line. When the 3 of you return, please teach a few princes a lesson. The green Tharch, the white Tharch, and the black Tharch looked at each other, then cupped their hands at the Lion Man at the same time, thanking him for saving their lives. The Sphinx's words were clear. They did not want to see the 3 celestial clans be taken over by the celestial court, and that was why he had arrived in time to drive Wuxian away. But, did this they refer to Great Horns and his disciple, or some other existences? This was a question that none of them dared to ask. Apart from Goddess Nuwa, who sat quietly in Empress Was Palace and paid no attention to the affairs of the world, the other 34 Tao fusing experts, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, the 9 Tao patriarchs, and the 18 saints, were the strongest experts in Pangu world today. They represented the supreme power of this world, and their will was almost the will of the heavenly Tao. Great Horns was one of the 18 saints, a formidable existence born in the chaos before the creation of heaven and earth. After the creation of heaven and earth, he survived the immeasurable calamity, and finally fused with the Tao during one of the apocalypses. He escaped unscathed from the calamity that destroyed everything, and attained the indestructible fruit of origin. In front of such a figure, even though his actions and words were too strange, how could Green Emperor and the other gods, who were born after the creation of heaven and earth, dare to say anything? Because of their origins, Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor could never fuse with the Tao. They could at most possess the divine abilities of a Tao fusing expert, but they could never truly fuse with the Tao and reach the realm of indestructibility. After bowing respectfully to Great Horns, the 3 of them sat cross-legged on the root of the crimson tree, exercising their divine abilities to absorb natural energy and restore their cultivation bases. But, as they were surrounded by an ocean of lava, the fire elemental energy had driven away the energy of all other elements. So, they could only cooperate with each other and use the divine ability of the 5 elements to convert the fire elemental energy into acquired energy that they could use to heal their injuries. But, the efficiency was very slow. The Lion Man looked down at the 3 of them. With a wave of the sword in his hand, the root on which they were sitting slowly changed color, and the crimson flame disappeared. The root, which had plunged into the unknown depth of Pangu continent, had absorbed a great amount of first wood, 7th metal, and water energy and sent them into the bodies of the 3 emperors. Green Emperor opened his eyes gratefully and nodded at the Lion Man, then closed his eyes again and immersed himself in healing his injuries. The energy of 3 elements absorbed by the crimson divine tree gathered around them and formed a small spiritual realm that was denser than the one in the underground spirit cave in Yuxiong Plain. The 3 emperors possessed powerful cultivation bases, and their bodies devoured the surrounding energy like a black hole. 10,000 parts of energy were refined and transformed into 1 part of their divine power, and 1,000,000 parts of energy were transformed into a wisp of natal divine energy. With that, their severely wounded bodies began to gradually recover. Because of the existence of Great Horns and the Lion Man, the 3 emperors did not have to worry about being hurt by external enemies. So, they shut off their senses and focused all their attention on healing their injuries. They were unaware of what was happening in the outside world, and could only rely on their instinct to absorb energy to heal themselves. In this way, their healing speed was at least 10,000 times faster than before, and it would only take them a few days at most to fully recover. As the fairies condensed from the heavenly Tao, the three emperors were indeed blessed with miraculous healing abilities. But soon, the healing speed of their injuries gradually slowed down. Gradually, the spirit chi that they had absorbed and transformed into divine power, as well as the natal spirit chi that had been compressed into divine power, disappeared from their bodies. Carefully, Wu Qi snuck under the three emperors. He, too, retracted his 5 senses and 6 senses, and transformed into a faintly discernible wisp of primal energy. The thievery energy reached into the three emperors' bodies through the roots of the tree, carefully collecting the divine power and natal divine energy that had been regenerated in them. An enormous amount of pure divine power kept pouring into Wu Qi's body, gradually accumulating and accumulating inside him. Wu Qi comfortably absorbed the divine power and divine energy that the three emperors had painstakingly refined. At the same time, the thievery energy gradually fused with the cores of their slumbering divine souls, carefully copying the understanding of the laws that the heavenly Tao had given them when they were born like a photocopier. The first generation of gods when heaven and earth were created possessed the most complete imprints of the laws that represented the heavenly Tao. Even if the immortals of later generations who cultivated wood, water, or metal element cultivation techniques had reached the realm of Tao breaking, they could not be compared with the imprints of the laws that the three emperors possessed. There were even Tao breaking immortals who paid a heavy price to ask the three emperors questions, just to get a word or two about the true secrets of the heavenly Tao from them. But now, without spending any effort, Wu Qi had obtained everything they knew from the three emperors. As the vast laws of the heavenly Tao were slowly absorbed by Wu Qi, he also stole the experiences and insights of the three emperors over the years, their joys and sorrows, their gratitude and hatred, and even how many secret treasure vaults they had, and how many concubines they had apart from their wives. All this top-secret information was stolen by Wu Qi one by one. It made sense that Mouse Bai, who had inherited Wu Qi's scroll of stealing, was hunted down by all the almighty experts in the universe in his previous life. No one wanted their most private things to be stolen at will. Only the inheritor of the scroll of stealing, who had obtained the first thread of thievery energy in the universe, could have such a freakish divine ability that everyone was afraid of. There was too much information in the divine soul cores of the three emperors. Wu Qi roughly estimated that it would take him a few days to turn all their memories into his own. With a satisfied smile on his face, Wu Qi calmed down and began to absorb the memories of the three emperors, as well as their newly refined divine energy and divine energy. At the same time, he carefully sent a thread of thievery energy into the divine tree, slowly extracting its natal energy essence and fusing it with himself. The natal energy essence contained in the divine tree was so enormous that it almost made Wu Qi shed tears of excitement and surprise. The divine tree had not developed any sentience yet. Like a butterfly in a cocoon, it was waiting for the day when it would break out of the cocoon through quantitative change. Wu Qi could absorb its natal energy essence to his heart's content without worrying about being discovered. As long as he controlled the speed of absorption and did not let the divine tree's aura change too quickly, he would be able to do it. His magic power grew thicker bit by bit, and the heaven-refining grand magic was quietly activated. The absorbed energy essence, divine energy, and divine energy were all refined into one by the magic. Just as he was happily plundering the divine tree, a bolt of lightning hundreds of millions of miles in circumference came whistling down from the void. Amidst the terrible rumble of thunder, the 360,000 restrictive spells great horns had deployed around the divine tree loosened with a deafening rumble, and countless cracks of various sizes appeared on all the runes and runes on them. The thunderbolt had nearly destroyed the restrictive spells laid out by great horns, and had even awakened him from his slumber. "Are you courting death?" Great Horns's words were always so straightforward. Eyes wide, he slowly rose to his feet and stared at an old man in a Taoist robe hovering in midair, issuing a death threat. Surrounded by a hazy purple cloud, the old Taoist priest sat cross-legged on a green cattail hassock. His body was as smooth as a bronze bell. He squinted his long and narrow eyes, and his long silver eyebrows, which were about 3 feet long, were moving without any wind, leaving a series of mysterious trajectories around him. Looking down condescendingly at Great Horns, the old Taoist cried out in a deep voice, "Great Horns, why did your disciple ruin the celestial court's plan?" Great Horns's eyes went wide as he cried out, "What's wrong with it? It's none of your business." The old Taoist opened his mouth, but as if he knew there was no way he could explain it clearly to a rascal like Great Horns, he gritted his teeth and cried out, "Hand over Green Emperor, White Emperor, and Black Emperor, or I'll destroy your origin tree of fire today, fuck you." Great Horns's words and actions were always so straightforward. He soared into the sky, pulled out a spear shrouded in purple flame out of nowhere, and thrust it at the old Taoist's lower abdomen. His speed was clearly beyond the Taoist's reaction, and the spear went hard into his abdomen. The old Taoist grunted, then pulled out a dragon tiger Rui scepter and smashed it down with it. A loud clang rang out and dented Great Horns's head. Great Horns fell to the ground, and the old Taoist soared into the sky. Both of them were panting, staring at each other without saying a word for a long time.